Chapter 1073. Holding the bloody head, he asked who was in favor and who was against it. In fact, he was asking if they wanted to die or not. The result was self-evident. After a short delay, the two teams merged into one. Tang Yin and the others became inconspicuous guards and merged into the second prince's ceremonial team. What followed was naturally a hurried journey, which was also the beginning of the suffering of the old nobles in the negotiation team. Previously, the second prince and his team were eager to return home and wished they could immediately fly back to the southern capital to take charge of the situation and stabilize their forces. However, because there were too many middle-aged and old nobles in the team, they could not withstand the bumpy ride and could not speed up even if they wanted to. However, now that Tang Yin was in charge of the team's journey, he did not have time to waste on this. He immediately ordered to abandon all the extravagant carriages, gorgeous ceremonial teams, and other unnecessary things, and change them to fast horses to increase their speed. This move naturally took the lives of those old nobles. They had lived like princes for most of their lives, so when had they ever experienced such a harsh battle? Just a bumpy ride on horseback and a young second prince's face turned pale, not to mention those old nobles who were already old. They felt as if their bones were broken and their bodies were numb. Even so, the demon called Tang and still had an undisguised dissatisfaction on his face and urged the team to speed up again and again from time to time. Seeing this, the old nobles dared not speak out, although they were cursing and slandering in their hearts. Looking at the bloodstains on their clothes that had not yet dried, their courage disappeared. They could only grit their teeth and hold on bitterly. They now completely understood that identity and status did not matter here. Once they fell behind, the demon would definitely abandon them without hesitation. When that time came, thinking about the territory under their feet, falling behind was undoubtedly no different from committing suicide. In fact, these old nobles still did not fully understand. Although it was painful to follow Tang Yin, this pain was only temporary. With Tang Yin leading the team, all the long-distance teleportation portals in the north were naturally at his disposal. In other words, they did not need to experience the painful journey through the night, and the time to return to the south would be greatly shortened. More importantly, the sooner they returned, the less damage they would suffer in the south. From a certain point of view, this was actually Tang Yin's imperceptible contribution when he borrowed the help of the second prince and his entourage. Originally, although Tang Yin was too domineering and did not make it clear when the two teams were not in the same team, both sides were in the same boat. If someone were to cause trouble for the second prince and his entourage, it would be equivalent to causing trouble for Tang Yin. So, he would have to deal with them personally. It was a pity that the curly-haired old noble was greedy and became more muddle-headed as he aged. In the end, not only did he not get what he wanted, he even lost his life. He was a lamentable example of courting death. Well, the journey is always boring. Let's temporarily shift our gaze away from here and follow the direction of Tang Yin's footsteps. South, south, and then south. As long as it was a force, there would always be a center that represented power, economy, and other important things. It could be as small as the stronghold of the mountain bandits and the manor of the noble family. It could be as big as the imperial city of the northern wilderness tribes or the imperial castle of the Bran Empire. The Temple of Light, as a huge force that was closely related to the Bran Empire, naturally had its own center. The only difference was that the latter was not the center of political power and economy, but the center of theocracy. This difference would not weaken the prestige of the Temple of Light. On the contrary, although the Temple of Light had tens of thousands of followers for thousands of years, its potential influence covered almost two-thirds of the land. It was terrifying. Of course, this was in the past. After the Grey Coat army controlled the north of the Bran, the power of the Temple of Light had shrunk along with the Empire. Now, it could only influence the southern part of the Bran. Its prestige was not as great as before. Perhaps this was the real reason why the Temple of Light was still unwilling to admit defeat after the Empire gave in. It secretly schemed against the Grey Coat army. Let's not talk about other things. Let's get back to the main topic, to the center of theocracy on this continent, the Temple of Light. Unlike the Temple of Light in the north, which was built on the wilderness and created a generous atmosphere to welcome the worship of followers from all directions, the Temple of Light seemed to disdain this kind of hypocrisy. Its performance was the complete opposite. It kept a strict distance from the ordinary followers and played with a high-end sense of mystery and prestige. This was not a casual remark. It could be seen from the location where the Temple of Light was built. A few hundred miles to the east of the imperial capital, there was a huge lake that was as smooth as a mirror. It was boundless and had slight ripples. In the center, there was only a single island that covered a vast area. There was no shelter around it. If one looked at the island from the two sides of the lake, there was a faint mist surrounding it. It was condensed and did not dissipate. It could not help but make people yearn to worship it. The Temple of Light was built on this island. Except for the limited docks on the shore of the lake and the ships that belonged to the Temple of Light, there was no passage or any means of transportation that could reach the central island. In other words, without the permission of the Temple of Light, no one could get close to the shore and see the whole picture of the Temple of Light. This style, the so-called country within a country, was not as good as this. However, this majestic style was the supreme glory for the internal clergy of the Temple of Light, but for someone who had just arrived on the island not long ago, it was no different from a prison. It was the kind that was very familiar. Xiao Weian sat by the window and looked at the familiar environment and atmosphere. She stroked the blanket on her lower abdomen and sighed softly. She felt that things were still the same, but people had changed. It was very strange, and she even felt bored and disgusted. Logically speaking, it should not be like this, because she had been here for more than 10 years. Except for a few forbidden areas, she was familiar with every stone and tree on the island, including every building on it. It was only a year or two in the future, so she should not feel strange and disgusted. But perhaps it was because she was now in a different position, and looking at this familiar scenery, whether it was from the perspective or the senses, she naturally did not feel the same reverence as before. Thinking of this, Sylvia could not help but shake her head and sigh softly again. At this moment, you're going to be a mother. It's not good to be in a bad mood. Amidst the laughter, the door behind her was pushed open. A beautiful young woman who was removing the veil wrapped around her head stood at the door. She narrowed her eyes and smiled at Sylvia, who was slightly startled, and said in a familiar tone, "Long time no see. Ugly girl." "Mia," Sylvia exclaimed, calling out the other party's name. "Well, not bad. You haven't forgotten an old friend." The beautiful young woman named Mia seemed to be very satisfied with Sylvia's reaction. Her watery eyes narrowed again, and she nodded with a smile. "It's really you, Mia." Sylvia showed the joy of meeting an old friend again. She subconsciously got up, and the blanket on her lower abdomen and legs fell to the ground. "Where have you been all these years? I once looked for you, but I couldn't." Before she finished speaking, the beautiful young woman had already hurried over and forced Sylvia to sit down on her shoulders. "Aya, don't you know your body's condition now? I thought you were the majestic flower of nights. Quickly sit down." As she grumbled, Mia picked up the blanket on the ground, dusted it off, and covered Xiao Weian's protruding belly again. "Of course, I know you've looked for me before, but I don't want to see you. It's very embarrassing. Okay. We clearly trained together in the Knights department, but in the end, you became the famous flower of Knights, while I couldn't persevere and became an old man's mistress. With such a big gap, what if you laugh at me when we meet again? Of course I have to avoid you." Sylvia was startled, and then she could not help but explain with a bitter smile. "How could I laugh at you?" "That's the problem. You won't laugh at me, but I will laugh at myself even more. But you still sincerely care for me, and that's even more infuriating." After arranging the blanket angrily, Mia suddenly looked up with a sly smile hidden in her eyes. Looking at Sylvia, who was mumbling to herself, she covered her mouth and laughed. I'm just kidding. I didn't expect you to still be so serious and dull after so many years. Can't help but be amused." Mia." Sylvia did not know whether to laugh or cry as she lightly hit Mia's arm. Perhaps it was because Mia, who was still as mischievous as ever, had arrived that she finally found a sense of familiarity in this unfamiliar place. The gloomy feeling of imprisonment from before was greatly alleviated, and her mood instantly relaxed. Just as she was about to follow up on the previous topic, she could not help but hesitate. Then now you're still that old man's mistress. What a coincidence. I didn't expect him to be the one who caught you this time. Mia did not have any reservations, and she spread her hands casually. You know, once a clergyman is found to have an affair with a woman, it's impossible for him to progress in the church. That old man is an archdeacon, and is only one step away from becoming a red-robed archbishop. Of course, he wouldn't bear to give it up. That's why I could only leave the headquarters of the church and stay in the place he arranged for me outside. It's not bad. I'm being waited on, and I don't have to worry about food and clothing. She paused and looked at Sylvia with a chuckle. Speaking of which, he has to thank you. Otherwise, he would have been punished this time. Thank me. Yes. That old man led the church's elite team of mages out this time. In the end, not only did he fail to complete the mission, he couldn't even bring the red-robed archbishops back safely. Wouldn't he be punished? Fortunately, he caught you. This can be considered to have made up for his mistakes. Sylvia did not know whether to laugh or cry at such a reason for thanking her. However, she was also familiar with Mia's character and knew that she was not joking. She only smiled bitterly and shook her head. How can I be so valuable? It should be the result of his own activities. You don't know. Mia looked at Sylvia strangely. Or do you not believe me and think that I'm here to get information from you through our friendship? What do I know? All right, looks like you really don't know. Mia looked at Sylvia, who was at a loss and did not seem to be faking it. She tilted her head speechlessly. Then let me tell you. Because you were caught, the Grey Coat Army and the Northern Wilderness tribes postponed their plans to attack the Bran Empire. Tell me, do you think you're valuable? Believe me, as long as this situation continues, they will worship you like a father god. Sylvia's body trembled when she heard that. A familiar figure flashed across her mind, and all sorts of feelings surged into her heart. It was warm. She was stunned for a moment, and subconsciously looked at the room that was not luxurious, but was still clean and quiet. She nodded in realization. I see. No wonder I was sent here immediately after being in prison for a short while. Not only that, when you were caught, didn't you request for a few experienced women to accompany you? Mia pointed at herself. That's why I'm here. You? Even though Sylvia was already extremely shocked, she still could not help but widen her eyes when she heard that. Mia immediately shouted in dissatisfaction. Hey, what do you mean by that? Are you looking down on me? I'm already a mother of 2 children now. If it wasn't for that old man being useless, I could have given birth to a cavalry team. Really? Nonsense, of course it's true. 2 children. Otherwise, do you think that old man would have kept me until now? It's all because I didn't disappoint him. Relying on men? Unreliable. All right, do you still remember when we talked about choosing men when we were young? There's no hope for me in this life. I'm going to be an old man's mistress. You? Pause for a while. Looking at Sylvia's bloated belly, Mia smiled and said, I remember that your basic condition for choosing men is that they have to be stronger than you in terms of strength. Looking at it this way, not only can he suppress you in terms of strength, but he also has the means to influence the Grey Coat Army and the Northern Wilderness tribes. TSK. You also found an old man? This is great. We sisters don't have to laugh at each other now. Sylvia pursed her lips and shook her head while holding back her laughter. No, he's not an old man. He should be younger than me. All right, I even talked to him about you before. Don't be stubborn. I won't laugh at you. At least for the sake of our sisterhood for so many years, I won't laugh at you in your face. Younger than you? Don't think that I don't know the situation now that I'm not cultivating. With the strength of a female T-Rex like you, how many people in the younger generation can be your match? No, he's really younger than me. I swear in the name of Father God. What are you doing? So many years of sisterhood. Don't pull me. You didn't even give me a chance to laugh at you. Don't pull me. I want to jump into the lake. Chapter 1074. A few days later. Well, to be precise, only 3 days later, Tang In and the rest arrived at the area around the Lino River. It had to be said that this speed was astonishing. If the noble negotiation team were to make this journey by themselves, it would probably take at least 2 or 3 times the time. Of course, if they really had a choice, they might not have wanted to come so quickly. But no matter what, they had finally made it through this hellish journey and were nearing the end of their goal. And at this moment, after a short 3 days, what was supposed to happen had finally arrived. Damn it! How dare they say that we are imposters? How are we going to go back? This bastard is going too far. After passing the information, a stack of papers was finally thrown onto a wooden stump by the side of the road. The pale faces of the second prince and the noble negotiation team turned even uglier. The process was very simple. Before the second prince had returned to the south to take charge of the situation, the first prince's forces in the capital had taken the initiative to make things difficult for him and announced it to the world. The general idea was that the second prince and the rest had died under the schemes of the Grey Coat Army. They were very sorrowful, and the Grey Coat Army was very cunning. This was because not only did the Grey Coat Army set up the second prince and the rest, they even sent people to disguise themselves as the second prince and the rest. Now, they might be rushing towards the south with the intention of misleading the public and destabilizing the empire. This plan of taking the firewood from under the cauldron could be said to be vicious. The goal was also very obvious. Even if the second prince and the rest returned to the south, their true identities would be suspected. Naturally, not many people would be willing to believe the words and orders they gave. Everyone. Amidst the intense cursing, Tang Yin swept his gaze across the crowd and said calmly, "Cursing and swearing won't solve anything. The main question now is whether you can still pass through the Lino River normally." To be honest, it was not surprising that such a situation would occur, at least in Tang Yin's opinion. If he was the first prince, knowing that his younger brother, the second prince, was very likely not dead and would come back to destabilize his throne, he would also choose to strike first to gain the initiative. His methods might even be more vicious than this, of course, now that he was dead. This was a problem that the second prince and the others had to face. It had nothing to do with Tang Yin. He only cared about whether the second prince and the others could return to the south normally, safely, and even with great fanfare. This would cause a great commotion and provide cover for their subsequent rescue operation. No problem. The second prince nodded and spread out a military map of the south bank of the Lino River that was obtained by a secret agency. The map clearly marked the garrisons of the Brand's armies. He pointed at a river crossing and said, "Later, we will take a boat and pass through here. Then, we will disembark from this area. The Ashen Flame Legion is guarded by General Clay." "This won't do, Your Highness." An old nobleman was shocked when he saw this. "I remember that Clay's family is on the side of the first prince, and I heard that Clay himself has a close relationship with the first prince. If we go through this waterway, won't we be walking right into a trap?" "Don't worry." The second prince waved his hand and interrupted him. He said confidently, "This is just the situation on the surface. In fact, General Clay and I have known each other for many years. There will be no problem for us to pass through here." The old noblemen were also experts in scheming. Hearing this, they immediately understood. "Your Highness is wise. So, General Clay is a secret agent that you have placed by that thief's side? That's enough. This is nothing." Under the current situation, the second prince, naturally, did not have time to listen to these flattering words. He shook his head and sighed. "This is just a normal method. I think I don't lack such secret agents around me." Hearing this, everyone could not help but be stunned. They looked at each other, and their expressions were a little doubtful. After the second prince finished speaking, he knew that he had misspoken. This should be the truth, but it sounded like he was hinting at something. And the coverage was too wide, including everyone present. He waved his hand and changed the topic. He looked at Tang Yin and said, "Before we disembark, I need to send someone to bring my token to General Clay so that he can prepare in advance." "Okay." Tang Yin nodded. "Your people? My people? Use my people. This way, it will be more credible. The second prince turned his head and looked at a green-clothed consecrator behind him. He simply bowed and said, Elderda, General Clay has seen you, so I'll have to trouble you to make a trip. Your Highness is too polite. Because of the shocking battle on the river, the water level had decreased greatly. Now, the so-called port city on the north bank of the Lano River no longer existed. Instead, there were large swamps and mudflats. It was also because this place was now truly in no man's land. The brand could not manage it. The Gray Coat Army did not have time to manage it, and the Northern Wilderness Tribes Army was still on their way here. Therefore, this place was especially desolate and desolate. However, although there was no port, ships could still be found. It did not take long for a group of hundreds of people to arrive at the Lano River. They boarded 3 large merchant ships that had already been prepared and sailed into the river. Although the Bran Empire had retreated to the south in name, in reality, this so-called retreat was only retreating to the north. As a natural military barrier that separated the north from the south, the endless Lano River was actually still under the control of the Bran army. In fact, from a certain perspective, the current Lano River was equivalent to the Bran's frontline border. It was the last piece of clothing that the Bran Empire had. It was an important military location that could not be lost. Once they lost this place, the southern Bran's environment, where even mountains were rare, would naturally not be able to stop the Horde's cavalry from invading. At that time, the Bran Empire would truly be destroyed, of course. It was still too early to think about this. Also because, luckily, there's still the Lano River. Beside the ship, the second prince looked at the vast waters in the distance and sighed helplessly and rejoicingly. From here, they were not far from the first river mouth that they had to pass through. It would only take a few hours, and they would arrive in the evening. Therefore, other than a few old nobles who could not take it anymore, most people did not go into the cabins to rest. Instead, they stood on the deck and chatted idly. Of course, even at this time, not many people dared to get close to the area around Tang Yin. In the Bran's negotiation team, the second prince was the only one. There was no response, but Tang Yin knew the meaning behind the second prince's words. The helplessness was referring to the Bran's current precarious situation. The water that was supposed to promote the economic prosperity of the North and the South had now become the last barrier to protect the Millennial Empire. The second prince felt a little helpless and a little ironic. As for rejoicing, it was referring to the existence of this wide water area, so the Bran Empire would not have to face the brutality and toughness of the Northern Wilderness tribes. Mr. Tang Yin, you're a wise man. Seeing that he did not get a response, the second prince pondered and continued. Do you think the Empire can survive this disaster? Tang Yin frowned slightly. The Empire is your empire. It's more appropriate to ask you about this kind of thing. The second prince was stunned. Then he nodded and sighed. Yes, we should ask ourselves. The barbarians are not good at water battles. In the history of the Northern Wilderness, there's basically no experience of fighting here. Logically speaking, the Empire's safety should not be a problem in the short term. But he didn't continue. But the fact that he was talking about the advantages of his side and the fact that he couldn't hide the confusion in his eyes clearly indicated that he wasn't very optimistic about the future of the Empire. He took a deep breath, then suddenly turned around and bowed. Mr. Tang Yin, can I ask you for a favor? No, Tang Yin was not Josiah. He turned a blind eye to the second prince's bow. He did not even lift his eyelids and directly rejected the second prince. With the second prince's status, being rejected directly was not a common experience. Therefore, he was stunned when he heard this. He smiled bitterly and said, I think our enemies are the same, at least for now. The Temple of Light and my cruel brother are also the targets that the Gray Coat Army is eager to eliminate, right? Perhaps, but I think you misunderstood. Tang Yin was not surprised by the second prince's request. In fact, it was a little unexpected that the second prince would wait until now to ask for help. However, he still refused. The Gray Coat Army is the Gray Coat Army, and I am me. I'm only here to save Sylvia. Everything else has nothing to do with me. I see. The second prince nodded his head non-committally and then smiled. I heard that Sir Twain's identity is an assassin. In that case, if I issue an assassination mission to you in my own name, you can name the bounty. Your Highness. Tang En rubbed the space between his eyebrows. It had to be said that even with Tang En's current state of mind, he was still speechless at the second prince, who was like a peddler trying to sell his wares. He raised his hand and pointed at a few palace consecrators who were on guard not far away. With your status, there are many expert assassins who are willing to kill for you. Why do you have to find me? The main reason is because you are professional. The second reason is because you are an outsider. The second prince was very frank and answered without hesitation. Then I'll give you 2 reasons why I can't help you. Tang En spread his hands. The main reason is that I'm very busy now. The second reason is that I'm really busy now. Hearing this, the second prince paused for a moment, but he didn't get angry. He took out a scroll from his bosom and handed it over. I was rude. Since that's the case, Mr. Tang En, just pretend that I didn't mention it. Well, this is the general topographic map of the Divine Hall headquarters and some related information. I drew it according to my memory. You know, even with my status, I don't go to the Divine Hall headquarters too often, so this information is not comprehensive. Take it as an apology. After finishing his words, the second prince smiled gently, bowed, and turned to leave. After subconsciously taking it, Tang En raised his head and looked at the second prince's back. He could not help but be startled. Then he shook his head and laughed. A smart person would always be a smart person. This was not an apology. It was clearly a heavy favor. The point was, Tang En had to accept this favor. The Divine Hall headquarters was so mysterious that there were so many versions of rumors circulating in the world. It was impossible to distinguish the truth from the lies. In this case, the importance of this scroll, which was personally experienced and written by the second prince, to Tang En's rescue operation, was self-evident. Furthermore, the second prince had actually sent such a significant item over so casually without even mentioning a single request. How was Tang En supposed to react to this? That was why smart people were the most annoying. Chapter 1075. In the evening, the sun set in the west, and mist gradually formed. In a vast expanse of white water, several large merchant ships that were speeding and gradually slowed down after reaching a predetermined area. Finally, they dropped their anchors somewhere on the river's surface, extinguished all their lights, and completely stopped moving. What followed was a silent and anxious wait. Everyone, including the old nobles who had been resting in the cabins but were still half dead, staggered to the deck and looked at the southern waters, unable to hide their anxious expressions. The royal consecrator who had gone to pass the message had returned successfully, and the news he brought back was also very smooth. But even so, the members of the noble negotiation team who had experienced life and death situations were already seriously nervous and extremely insecure. They desperately wanted to rely on something, but they did not dare to believe in anything. It was torture. Of course, Tang En did not have such a feeling of worrying about personal gains and losses. Looking around, there seemed to be some familiar features of the waters, and he looked thoughtful. That's right, he had been here before, not long ago. Sailing forward for a while, it was the river mouth where he and Bamitu had blocked Wuding. TSK, what a coincidence! Thinking of this, there was a slight commotion around him. Looking up, in the distant southern waters, a few large figures could be vaguely seen breaking through the thick mist that had not dissipated for a long time, quietly and continuously approaching at high speed. They're finally here. After a pause, the second prince raised his hand and waved lightly. He shouted in a low voice, "Get ready." The order was passed down one after another, and there was another slight commotion on the few large merchant ships. Swords and sabers were unsheathed, bows and arrows were loaded, and they were ready for battle. The austere atmosphere instantly froze to the freezing point. There was nothing to say about this response. In the current situation, even the second prince, who was very confident in General Clay, did not dare to casually gamble with his own safety and life to bet on the other party's loyalty. but the facts proved that they seemed to be overthinking. The few gigantic ships, which were the ferocious battleships, slowed down on their own when they were a few miles away and eventually stopped moving. Then, a small boat was released, carrying a few people, and it approached again along the floating river. Phew! That's right, it's General Clay. A few old nobles leaned against the side of the ship and squinted for a while before they finally confirmed the identity of the newcomer. They could not help but cry out in joy. Since the identity of the person had been confirmed, and the other party was on a small boat without any guards, it meant that there was no danger in the current situation. The lights were turned on, and the swords were put down. The tense and heavy atmosphere from a moment ago was swept away in an instant. The second prince exhaled a long breath and waved his hand happily. Release the sampan. Let's go and welcome General Clay together. One had to admit that the second prince knew how to conduct himself. Regardless of whether he was sincere or not, at the very least, he was never ambiguous on the surface. He waved his hand and led the group of old nobles all the way to the edge of the deck. It could be said that he had given enough face to General Clay. Soon, the small boat approached. Apart from Soldier Chow, there were 3 people on the other side. Following the rope ladder, the 3 of them jumped onto the merchant ship. The leader was a robust man in high-grade heavy armor, with a full beard on his face. He stepped onto the deck with an excited expression. He immediately took a few steps towards the second prince and bowed. Your Highness, your subordinate is late. General, there's no need to be so polite. Without waiting for General Clay to bow, the second prince had already stepped forward to hold the man's arm and interrupted his bow. He was also excited. If there were no accidents, what would happen next would be a touching scene of the ruler and his minister respecting each other. But at this moment, suddenly, a figure appeared. A figure instantly flashed into the arena from the back, passing by the group of old nobles who were rushing forward and the second prince who were supporting each other. He stopped and reached out his hand at lightning speed, accurately grabbing the wrist of one of the people who came with General Clay. This person was a middle-aged man who was also wearing high-grade armor. He should be a deputy general. Originally, he walked over quickly and was prepared to bow to the second prince and the group of old nobles. But he did not expect that the moment he stretched out his arm, a black figure would appear in front of him and grab his wrist. Who? The middle-aged deputy general was shocked when he saw this. A trace of panic flashed in his eyes as he subconsciously bent his arm to struggle and raised his knee to kick out. His instantaneous reaction could be said to be fast, but it could also be said to be correct. But the actual situation was that the moment he raised his knee, the black figure in front of him grabbed his wrist and instantly stepped behind him. Then, a flash of a blade lit up in his eyes. With a puff, his throat was ice cold, blood splattered everywhere. General, be careful. There's an assassin. Quick, protect His Highness, Tang In. Tang In. This unforeseen event happened too suddenly and ended too quickly. In a breath's time, before anyone could react, the middle-aged deputy general leaned forward and knelt on the deck with one knee. His right hand was grabbed by the back, while his left hand tried to grab his neck in vain. His throat let out a meaningless hiss, and a large amount of blood spread wantonly under his body. Huff! Behind him, under the illumination of the flickering lights, Tang inexpressionlessly controlled the twitching body under him. He grabbed the deputy general's right wrist with one hand and clamped the deputy general's neck with the other. He twisted the handle of the black dagger that was inserted into the deputy general's throat. Cluck, cluck, cluck. Blood poured out, and the clear and terrifying sound of bones rubbing against each other was chilling to the bone. The first to react was the other deputy general who was closest to him. When he saw this, his eyes almost popped out of their sockets. Without thinking, he pulled out his sword and stabbed forward. Go to hell. General, run. Tang In. What are you doing? Stop. Then everyone on the scene came to their senses at the same time and subconsciously did what was most beneficial to their side. They either screamed or retreated. The guards on the periphery raised their swords again and charged forward to surround Meng Chao. Seeing that a chaotic battle was inevitable, the deputy general's long sword had already pierced Tang Yin's back. Tang Yin did not get up, nor did he turn his head. He merely twisted his body slightly and instantly dodged the incoming sword. Then there was a crisp sound, and the two figures crossed each other. The deputy general, who had rushed forward too quickly, was a few steps away from Tang Yin. He stopped and roared like a tiger. Just as he was about to twist his waist and turn around to slash back with his sword, his body suddenly froze on the spot. He raised his right hand, but it was empty. He lowered his head subconsciously, but his sword had already returned to the scabbard at his waist. This strange scene not only shocked the deputy general, but also stunned the guards who were charging forward. The lights dimmed, and the river water splashed gently. The scene instantly fell into a short silence. Then there was a bang. Tang Yin put away his sword and stood up. The middle-aged deputy general at his feet knelt on the deck, still and silent. Why? Why did you kill him? Looking at Tang Yin, who was calmly wiping the blood on his hands as if he had done nothing, the second prince opened his mouth and asked in a trembling voice after a while, "Your Highness, is this one of your men?" If General Clay had not completely sorted it out before, he naturally understood everything now when he looked at the expressions and reactions of the people around him. He took a deep breath and looked at the deputy general lying in a pool of blood. The corner of his eyes twitched, and he turned to look at the second prince with inexplicable grief and indignation. Good. It seems that your Highness does not believe me. General, don't misunderstand. He has something in his hands. Without waiting for the second prince to explain, a royal consecrator frowned and looked at the dead deputy general. His eyes flashed as he suddenly spoke. Bulsh *T. The other deputy general recovered from the shock. Hearing that the other party had not only killed his comrade in front of him, but also seemed to have the intention of framing him, he immediately flew into a rage and opened his mouth to curse. "Shut up. Let's go take a look." General Clay shouted angrily. "Let's go together." The second prince looked at the expressionless Tang Yin and suddenly thought of something. He waved his hand and said, "General, don't be angry. There has to be an explanation. If it is confirmed that we made a mistake, I will personally give the general an explanation." At this point, with the status of the second prince, there was indeed nothing to argue about. All the nobles gathered together, and a clever soldier came forward to straighten the corpse of the middle-aged deputy general. Left hand, nothing. Right hand. He tried to open his clenched fist, but he did not manage to open it. "Be careful." Tang Yin suddenly opened his mouth and said. Hearing this, everyone could not help but be stunned. Then they vaguely remembered something. In the short battle just now, this hand seemed to have been tightly held by Tang, and the soldier nimbly exerted his strength again, and his 5 fingers finally opened. Under the dim light, a fiery red prismatic crystal shone in the palm of his hand. Suddenly, instantly, there was a burst of gasps in the field. As if it was agreed, everyone took a big step back, and their expressions changed greatly. General Clay and the deputy general did not retreat. Their eyes were as wide as copper bells. Explode crystal? How is this possible? General Clay stared blankly at the fiery red crystal and the familiar face in the pool of blood. He could not believe his eyes and murmured, "Holiness, why?" Before the second prince's identity reached the south bank, it was impossible for him to see the light of day. General Clay must be very clear about this, so the 2 deputy generals who came with him this time were naturally deeply trusted by him. But right now, his trusted subordinate was holding a powerful explosive crystal right under his nose. It sounded like something that was impossible. But no matter how impossible it was, with solid evidence, it could only be the truth. At this time, everyone looked at Tang Yin in a completely different way. It was obvious that this middle-aged deputy general had secretly hidden an explode crystal. Of course, it was not a gift. Think about it. With the power of the explode crystal, if he hurried to the side of the second prince and the nobles in the negotiation team and successfully detonated it, then in such a narrow range, the consequences were really unimaginable. However, Tang Yin did not have any special expression. He did not even want to know who was the mastermind behind this middle-aged deputy general. This was not a pretense. Originally, to put it bluntly, this was just an assassination. The other party had the determination to be a human bomb. His courage was commendable, but he was not a professional. And Tang Yin was a professional and the best of the best. In this way, wasn't the outcome already predetermined since a long time ago? Facing everyone's gaze, he frowned impatiently and waved his hand. Hurry up, change ships, and get on the road. Chapter 1076. Mother, why are you here? On the river, just as Tang Yin and the others were waiting for someone to come to their aid. In a hinterland where the tribal army was slowly advancing, Lan Sha also welcomed a special guest. It was her mother, the Northern Wilderness Empress. The imperial city is too noisy, so I came to your place to hide. Taking off her cloak, the Empress seemed to be in a good mood. She smiled and stroked Lan Sha's hair. Why am I not welcome? Of course not. Lan Sha shook her head subconsciously. Then she thought of the first half of the Empress's words and frowned. She asked tentatively, is it that the tribal forces in the imperial city are not stable? Haha, not really. They don't have the guts. The Empress smiled and waved her hand. She paused, looked at Lan Sha, and continued with a smile. It's just that it's annoying to keep persuading them. Well, it's actually two things, and they're both related to you. Me? Mother, please sit down. Someone, bring me a cup of hot tea. Yes. Sitting on the seat of the commander-in-chief in the central tent, the Empress looked at the strategic topographic map on the table in front of her. Then, she said casually, the first thing is that because you haven't returned yet, Thu's funeral couldn't be held as scheduled. So, you couldn't be buried. Funeral? Lan Sha trembled when she heard this. She raised her head and looked at the Empress in disbelief. Big brother is dead? You don't know? Seeing Lan Sha's undisguised shock, the Empress was taken aback as well. She frowned and said, he was ambushed and killed by a small tribe more than 100 kilometers away from the imperial city. You didn't know? I sent someone to inform you. It's my negligence. In the center of the tent, Bamitu appeared out of thin air with a guilty expression. He bowed and apologized. I've been recuperating these days and forgot to tell your highness this bad news. Oh, the Empress paused for a moment, then looked at Bamitu. Her eyes flashed, and she nodded in understanding. However, it only lasted for a moment. Then, he gently waved his hand and said, since there's a reason for this, Elder Ba doesn't need to take it to heart. In any case, the result will be the same if I come over and say it. This matter could be big or small. If it had happened to an ordinary messenger, the crime of negligence and dereliction of duty would have been enough to kill him many times over. However, with Elder Ba's status, regardless of whether it was intentional or unintentional, all he needed to do was apologize, which was a small matter. At this moment, Lan Sha, who had barely regained her senses but was still in a daze, asked in a daze, brother, was he really killed by a small tribe? Very absurd. At that time, I also had the same feeling. I suspected that the small tribe didn't have the guts to do this. I suspected that there was someone behind the scenes who was secretly instigating the murder. But the Empress let out a sigh, her eyelids drooping in sorrow. There was a large group of wilderness wolf riders that happened to pass by as evidence. After the incident, they went through a long investigation. That is indeed the truth. Is that so? Of course, that wasn't the truth. Not many people were fools, let alone the daughter of the man who had inherited her and the man whose name had shaken the continent and possessed monstrous military talent. Seeing the suspicion in Lan Sha's eyes that hadn't diminished in the slightest, the Empress felt a headache coming on. She had the urge to rub her forehead. It had to be said that Bamita's action of not informing Lan Sha of Tiu's death had put her in a very passive position. She was so passive that she could only stiffly change the topic. Reluctantly, She waved her hand and said, "All right, let's not talk about this now. The matter has already happened, and the anger of the royal family and I have already been vented. After that, when you go back to attend the funeral and see Tu for the last time, this matter will end here. Let's talk about the situation of the army. You seem to have reached some kind of agreement with the Gray Coat Army?" The Empress could casually change the topic and control her emotions because this matter had been orchestrated by her from beginning to end. And Lan Shah, who had just heard the news of Tiu's death, of course, wouldn't be so relaxed. But then again, no matter how suspicious Lan Shah was, she, who would never know the inside story, still didn't dare to believe that Tiu had died in the hands of her mother. This didn't make sense. Even a vicious tiger wouldn't eat its cubs, right? Taking a deep breath, Lan Shah forced herself to calm down and nodded. I agreed to lead their army to conquer the entire northern part of the brand. The condition is that the territory north of Firebeacon City must belong to our tribe after the war. As for the specific situation, Grandpa Bamitu should have told Mother about it. Although it didn't make sense, it didn't mean that Lan Shah completely believed that her mother was completely innocent in the matter of her brother's death. Thus, her tone was inevitably a little stiff. It wasn't hostile, but it was a little complicated and unfamiliar. The Empress naturally understood the meaning behind it, but she didn't care and directly chose to ignore it. She believed that with the passage of time, this matter and these estrangements would eventually pass, because Lan Shah was her daughter. She clapped her hands and sighed, revealing her pride. Beautiful. Taking advantage of the situation, borrowing strength for your own use. Without losing a single soldier or general, you took back the ancestral territory of the tribe. Just based on this achievement, there will definitely be a place for my daughter in the history of the continent. The Empress is extremely right. Your Highness will definitely be recorded in the history of war and praised by future generations. Bamitu also sighed emotionally and agreed. This wasn't flattery. People who had reached their level didn't need to flatter anyone at all. Then, without waiting for Lan Shah to wave his hands modestly, the Empress smiled and continued. Lan Shah, since you have commanded the Gray Coat Army before, then you should have some understanding of their battle strength. Tell me about it. Lan Shah didn't doubt her when he heard this. After thinking for a while, he said seriously, the Gray Coat Army's military structure is relatively simple. There aren't many soldiers who have received formal military training, and most of the generals were born in the wilderness. Their battle tactics and strategies are not very standard. In terms of battle strength, the Gray Coat Army soldiers should be weaker than the brand's regular army by a level. But, for example, if it's a short encounter, putting aside the purple cannons, the Gray Coat Army won't be a match for the brand's regular army with the same number of soldiers. But if it's a protracted battle, the final victory will definitely be the Gray Coat Army. Oh, why is that? Are there any obvious differences between the two? The Empress asked with interest. There's a big difference. In a short encounter, the two sides compete in the military tactics of the generals, the individual combat ability of the soldiers, the quality of the weapons and armor, and so on. These can be seen or easily perceived. But in a protracted battle, these things are no longer necessary, or they will only be secondary. At that time, the field of competition between the two sides will expand and level up. In addition to these things, there are also willpower, morale, and other things on the spiritual level. Mother, once something involves the spiritual level, it will no longer be easy to control and infer. To put it bluntly, if the battlefield is in the middle of a barren land, there will be no retreat, no logistics, and nothing. Even the soldiers won't be able to receive military pay, and they won't be able to see military glory. Under such circumstances, even the brand's regular army, which has received excellent military training, won't have much morale left. But the Gray Coat Army is different. They are used to and even familiar with this kind of combat environment. They don't have military pay, logistics, and so on before this, and they don't need it. As long as there are roots and grass, they will have the strength to raise their weapons again. To them, war is not a shortcut to glory, but a pursuit for survival. Just like before they joined the Gray Coat Army, They planted vegetables and harvested food in their own fields. That's their survival instinct. This kind of combat attitude, coupled with the philosophy that the Gray Coat Army's higher-ups have been persistently promoting. This army can't be killed. Can't be killed. It's enough to be called terrifying, terrifying. With such a long analysis and evaluation in one breath, it could be seen that Lan Shah did indeed have a very deep understanding of the Gray Coat Army, and this research was not only in the field of military affairs, but also involved other aspects. It was also because of this that when he made the final evaluation, Lan Shah's tone and expression were incomparably solemn. This also affected the Empress and Bamitu, who were at the side. They were either stunned, shocked, or deep in thought. The big tent fell into a moment of silence. Of course, unlike Lan Shah, who had personally experienced the Gray Coat Army, these two people's shock was mostly caused by Lan Shah's attitude, so their feelings were not as strong. So after a short moment of absent-mindedness, the Empress was the first to recover and break the silence. Then, if compared to the warriors of my tribe, how is their combat power? When Lan Shah heard this, he was stunned for a moment and realized something. Looking at the Empress, who was smiling quietly, he gradually frowned. This is the second thing that Mother mentioned before. The second thing related to me? Yes. Nodding, the Empress gently rubbed the space between her eyebrows. Let's not talk about other things for now. Just based on the fact that the Gray Coat Army helped our tribe successfully take back our former territory, we must thank them. But now that the cooperation is over, we have returned to our previous positions, so we don't owe them anything. Yes, this is the intention of each tribe's chief. Lan Shah directly interrupted. Then, Mother, what do you think? The Empress spread her hands and pointed to the ground under her feet, meaning that she did not say anything. I don't agree. I know. That's why I'm here. Compared to Lan Shah's somewhat agitated attitude, the Empress appeared to be very calm. This is destroying our own city walls. Lan Shah excitedly waved his hand. Our goal now is to defeat the brand, not to fight on both sides and be attacked for both sides. This is the real reason why you rejected it. The Empress tilted her head to look at Lan Shah and said softly, It's not because of that Tang Yin. Lan Shah was stunned and subconsciously turned to look at Bamitu. The latter's expression was normal, and he really had nothing to be ashamed of. As a person from the northern wilderness, it was natural for him to be loyal to the Empress. Naturally, this included telling the Empress in detail about Lan Shah and Tang Yin. Mother, you're joking. Lan Shah's face darkened. I'm the chief commander of the tribe's army. Every decision I make is naturally for the tribe's overall situation. Is that so? The Empress waved her hand to interrupt him, her expression indifferent. Then, considering the tribe's overall situation, can you explain the reason why the army is slowing down its advance? Lan Shah heard this and was stunned. The reason was self-evident, and no matter what it was, it couldn't be because the mountains were high and the road was long, and the tribe's soldiers were not used to the brand's climate and environment. These reasons could fool the tribe's soldiers who were not very bright, but certainly not the Empress. Haha, I actually regret it when I think about it. When he was in the northern wilderness imperial city, I saw that there were some signs between the two of you. But at that time, I didn't pay enough attention to it and let him go. In the end, not only did he cause trouble in the imperial city before he left, he even came to provoke you now. He really doesn't know what's good for him. It's not because of him. Clenching his fists, Lan Shah's face was a little pale. See, even now you're still protecting him. Even if you know that not only did he already have an official lover, but he also has a mistress outside and has a child. You're still explaining for him. Lan Shah. Oh, Lan Shah, you should think about your own identity. You're the princess of the northern wilderness. You're also the future northern wilderness empress. I won't say anything about you stealing another woman's man. Do you want to share a man with another woman? Suddenly standing up, the Empress, who had always been indifferent, was finally angry. Looking at the muttering Lan Shah, she shook her head in disappointment. Hand over the military power. There will be someone else to take over the military. As for you, it's time to calm down and wake up. After saying this, The Empress didn't look at the dazed Lan Sha anymore and stepped out of the tent. At this moment, suddenly, "I don't agree." The Empress stopped and turned her head in shock. Looking at Bamitu, who suddenly spoke, she was stunned, then couldn't help but shake her head and laugh. "Elder Ba, are you pleading for Lan Sha? Or also for that Tang Yin?" With Bamitu's status, even if he didn't understand military affairs, he naturally had the right to give his own opinions and suggestions to the Empress. But it was also because of this that the Empress was even more confused. "That kid doesn't need me to plead for him." The corner of Bamitu's mouth twitched, revealing a trace of a bitter smile. The 1-month deadline was given to him by His Highness. To be honest, I also thought it was ridiculous before. But now, unless His Highness takes back this statement, it's best for no one to interfere, not even your Majesty. "Why?" Frowning, the Empress didn't care about these somewhat disrespectful words. On the contrary, she asked very seriously, "Because if he wants to assassinate someone now, no one can stop him." Bamitu gave a very simple reason, helplessly spreading his hands. "Including me." The Empress was stunned. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." The reason couldn't be simpler, but it was also the most fatal reason. The reason was the same. Tang Yin felt guilty towards Lan Sha, especially after the other party agreed to give him a 1-month deadline. But this was only for Lan Sha alone, not for others. In other words, even if Lan Sha suddenly took back the 1-month deadline now, it was also reasonable, and Tang Yin wouldn't say anything. But if others took back the 1-month deadline, it would affect his rescue of Sylvia. With Tang Yin's current strength, of course, he couldn't be considered the world's #1. But with his assassination skills, if he wanted to kill someone after getting angry, even the world's #1 would have to be somewhat afraid. This was the true strength of an assassin, and also the charm of an assassin. Of course, the situation now was different. The Empress was Lan Sha's mother, and regardless of whether Tang Yin would really be ruthless to her after the incident. Now, the Empress only needed to persuade Lan Sha to take back the 1-month deadline. Realizing this, the Empress turned her head again, only to find that her daughter, Lan Sha, had already walked out of the tent. She lifted the curtain and walked out, leaving only a relaxed and cheerful sentence behind. "Mother, you're right. I'll go and reflect on it now." Chapter 1077. Sometimes, I wonder if people like us, who seem to be honorable and noble in the eyes of ordinary people, or even His Majesty the King, the Pope, and so on, are laughable in the eyes of people like you. 2 days ago, after killing the middle-aged lieutenant general who intended to drag everyone down with him on the spot, and under Twain's constant urging, everyone successfully changed ships and boarded the few giant warships that General Clay had brought. Then, under the cover of the battleships with the flag of the Ashen Flame Legion, the rest of the journey was smooth sailing. Of course, the atmosphere was tense and strange. There was no need to elaborate on the reason for the tension. Although the courageous middle-aged deputy general did not succeed, his actions had already revealed many problems. There was no need to suspect or investigate at all. It was definitely right to put the blame on the First Prince's side. Some things, it was one thing to scheme in the dark, but it was another thing to be ruthless on the surface. Although both of them had the same goal, their methods were different, and so were their natures. The middle-aged deputy general's crazy actions had undoubtedly expressed the attitude of the First Prince's side. This was a blatant declaration of war. It was also a fight to the death where there was no room for luck. Therefore, the Second Prince's side could not help but feel nervous. After all, they had lost the opportunity to strike first and were already at a disadvantage. The situation they were facing was even more passive. As for the strange emotions mixed in with the tension, it was because of the main character, Tang Yin. When they first met, Tang Yin was too fast, too anxious, and too cruel. When he attacked, he slit the throat with a dagger and killed without any mercy. It was inevitable that everyone would have such thoughts. Did he not think that he would make a mistake and did not consider the consequences of killing the wrong person? Of course, The subsequent facts proved that Tang En's actions were correct and saved everyone. However, regardless of whether it was the noble negotiation team or General Clay's side, when they thought about the bloody scene of the assassin's twitching body being suppressed and cruelly rotating the hilt of his sword, they could not help but feel sorrow in their hearts. It was like a fox mourning the death of a rabbit. Therefore, they naturally did not dare to get close to Tang En, let alone talk to him calmly. Of course, there were exceptions, such as the second prince. In a situation where everyone feared Twain like a tiger, he did the exact opposite. As long as he was free, wherever Tang En appeared, he would definitely be within 3 feet of him and would constantly find various topics to talk about. Even if Tang En didn't reply for a long time, he still enjoyed it and talked to himself excitedly. At first, the nobles were puzzled by the second prince's behavior, but as time passed and they saw more of it, they naturally understood. Yes, in the current situation, if there was a safe place in the brand, it must be by Tang En's side. With the latter's strength and assassination skills, which assassin could get close to him? However, even though they understood, they were still unwilling to do so. Firstly, it was because the second prince was at least familiar with them. When danger came, Tang En would not leave them in the lurch. However, if they were not friends, it would be hard to say what Tang En would do. Secondly, it was because they really didn't dare to do so. Although there was the danger of being assassinated in other places, being by Tang En's side was a constant threat. It had to be said that from this point of view, the second prince's previous series of favors and investments were not in vain. Although Tang En was very impatient with this noble follower, who followed him wherever he went like a fly, in the end, he did not say anything to drive him away. The second prince was, of course, satisfied with this result. However, it was unknown whether it was because of his personality or because he wanted to seize the time to build a relationship with Tang En. Blah, 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 blah. Thinking about Tang En's terrifying assassination methods and his valiant past achievements, he once again lamented to himself. Of course, what the second prince did not know was that his lamentation happened to be the tangled thoughts of the northern wilderness empress, who was thousands of miles away. Laughable? Do you know that no matter how strong an individual is, there will always be a limit? Perhaps it was because they would soon reach the south coast and completely get rid of the talkative second prince. Tang En sighed and finally opened his mouth to reply. For example, right now, I'm doing well in the north, but because the divine temple is located in the south, I have to travel thousands of miles to save people. In comparison, who do you think is more laughable and pitiful? This is different. You have cultivated for at most 20 years, while the divine temple has developed for thousands of years to reach its current scale. In comparison, you're the one who has the advantage. The second prince was an eloquent speaker, and he retorted without any hesitation. He shook his head. If you insist on saying so, then it's meaningless. Tortoises can live for thousands of years, but they are no match for humans who have only lived for a few hundred years. This is the truth. You can't not give us, the grassroots, a chance to resist just because someone has a deeper foundation and a longer history, right? Tisk, that's true. But you said this, haha. The second prince laughed disapprovingly and shook his head. I don't have the ability to destroy an empire, but I can kill a king. Such a domineering statement. I don't think Sir Tang En has forgotten who said it, right? Of course, Tang En would not forget because this was what he had written to Wu Ding. He raised his eyebrows. In terms of domineering, what I can do, your guardian Wu Ding and Elder Wu can do as well, or even more easily. Therefore, you should tell him about your personal strength theory. The situation is different, the current sword god. After a pause, the second prince thought of something and lowered his head with a gloomy expression. But after a moment, he returned to normal and said gently and firmly, Now I'm more and more convinced that my brother, who has connections with the Divine Hall and thinks he can sit back and relax, will definitely regret not paying enough attention to you and provoking you in the future. Tang En touched his nose. So, this is why you've been pestering me these days? Ha, that's right. The second prince laughed and spread his hands frankly. It's a pity that Sir Tang and doesn't like me and hasn't given me a chance to cooperate. That's because your highness overestimates me, and I've always been timid, so I don't dare to agree. Tang in replied with a faint smile. Then he narrowed his long and narrow eyes. In fact, apart from the cooperation, I'm very easy to talk to. Well, if people don't offend me, I won't offend them. Hearing this, the second prince was stunned. Then he suddenly raised his head and took a deep breath to suppress the joy on his face. He solemnly said, "If people don't offend me, I won't offend them. I've learned a lot." Tang Yin smiled and said no more. Look, it's so easy to chat with smart people. The second prince's courteous behavior in the past 2 days was not as simple as seeking temporary safety. His ambition was great, and he wanted more. Of course, he had a good eye. If possible, he even wanted to recruit Tang Yin, even if he had to pay any price. Unfortunately, as he expected, Tang Yin never gave him a chance. Although he let the second prince follow him, his indifferent attitude was enough to explain everything. There was no other way. Now, Tang Yin would not think about such things at all. Instead, he was thinking about how to kill his way into the headquarters of the Divine Temple and rescue Sylvia. So it was not surprising that the second prince was defeated repeatedly. Fortunately, as long as he worked hard, the result would not be too bad. With the second prince's noble status, it would be a lie to say that Tang Yin did not feel anything after so many days of tormenting him. Moreover, even if Tang Yin really had no intention to cooperate, he would still need the second prince's cooperation to mess up the situation later. So, he would give him some face. Finally, when the warship approached the south coast, Tang Yin relaxed. The second prince's sincere efforts to build a good relationship with him were not in vain after all. If people don't offend me, I won't offend them. This was actually a promise. It was no exaggeration to say that under the premise that Wu Ding and Bamitu died one after another, with Tang Yin's current strength, if the headquarters of the Divine Temple failed to kill him in the future, then in the entire world, there was basically no one who could control Tang Yin. It was still the same sentence. If he really wanted to kill someone at that time, no one would be able to sleep soundly. But the second prince, who had received the promise, was different. As long as he did not seek death by provoking Tang Yin in the future, even if he became the king of Bran in the future, he would still be in a hostile position with the Grey Coat army. Tang Yin would not take the initiative to assassinate him. This was the déjà vu of Tang Yin's death exemption card, wasn't it? Of course, if you had to ask whether this promise was useful or not, then it was like drinking water and knowing whether it was hot or cold. At least the second prince felt that it was worth it, so he could not hide the joy on his face, not long after, on the south coast. After sailing on the river for several days and nights, Tang Yin, the second prince, and the others finally stepped off the warship and set foot on Bran's land again. What they saw was completely different from the desolate north coast of the Leno River. At present, this place was unusually prosperous. There were majestic and mighty city walls that stretched for several miles, all kinds of newly built fortifications, ferocious war weapons, and endless rows of patrolling soldiers. On the top of the walls, there were battle flags with indistinct markings on them. The cold wind was as sharp as a knife, and it was biting cold, austere and tragic. This was now the last border of the Bran Empire. They did not stay for long. Under the guidance of General Clay, they wore soldiers' armor and quietly passed through the city gate and entered the hinterland of the south. There were no accidents, and it was impossible for there to be any accidents. Even if the Temple of Light and the first prince's forces knew that the second prince was not dead, they would not have expected him to return so quickly. Of course, this matter could not be hidden for long. It would probably take half a day. This was because the second prince, who wanted to gain a foothold in the south, would definitely mobilize the forces that were still loyal to him in the open and in the dark. He would strive to announce his return in the shortest time possible and expose the first prince's treacherous side. However, this did not have much to do with Tang Yin. After entering the hinterland of the south and leaving the area under the control of the military, without saying goodbye, Tang Yin quietly left the group with Owens and the members of the Gray Space and disappeared. Chapter 1078. Although it was said that they had left the team and disappeared, Tang In and the others naturally did not immediately head for the headquarters of the Divine Temple. Well, if they really did that, the possibility of being killed by the Divine Temple would be greater. In fact, Tang In and the others did not go anywhere. After leaving the team, they found a farm nearby and hid in the fields with flourishing crops. Well, the geographical environment of the South was indeed a little strange for assassins and bandits. Basically, there were no towering mountains. At a glance, there were only open plains with no cover. They squatted for half a day. Soon after, the expected commotion finally came. As expected, the second prince's reaction was swift and vast. It should be because he had contacted them on the ship. As soon as he set foot on the South, various forces in the open and in the dark, as well as various troops and private soldiers, all gathered like a tide to assist the emperor. Such a grand movement, naturally, could not escape the eyes of the first prince's forces. They should have been prepared for it. In just half a day, the fields where Tang In and the others were hiding and were filled with dust from all directions. The soldiers were as numerous as ants, and all kinds of banners, including those of the Divine Temple, were rolling in the wind. Tang In and the others, who were close by, were dazzled and could not help but be secretly shocked. Fortunately, these soldiers and troops were in a hurry and did not have time to send scouts to explore the surroundings. Otherwise, Tang In and the others would have been immediately exposed. It was not until the evening, when the surrounding movement calmed down a little, that Tang In and the others, who had been lying in the fields for half a day, poked their heads out. For the sake of caution, Tang In did not lead the others to set off immediately. Instead, he let Halai take 2 members of the gray space and sneak out of the fields to scout for information. The results of the scouting were expected, but also unexpected. What was expected was that the troops, who seemed to be rushing for a funeral, were indeed the forces of the Divine Temple and the first prince. They were coming for the second prince and the others. As for the unexpected, it was because Tang In had underestimated the second prince's methods, as well as the huge commotion on his side. In just half a day, the second prince's side had already taken over 3 large cities, and this trend was still expanding. He had already gained a foothold in the south and had the qualifications and confidence to directly challenge the first prince's side. Even Tang In could not help praising the speed and decisiveness of the second prince. Then he came to his senses and could not help being overjoyed. The reason was very simple. The bigger the movement there was on the second prince's side, the more arrogant he would be. Twain's side would have more opportunities to fish in troubled waters. At the very least, it would save them the trouble of being hunted down by the temple. The opportunity was rare and it was fleeting. Of course, Tang In would not hesitate to miss it. Soon after receiving the news, he immediately led everyone out of the fields. Under the cover of the dark night, they rushed to the hinterland of the south. There were no ordinary people in this team. Or to be frank, except for Owens, they were all assassins who would immediately flee if they missed their target. Therefore, there was no doubt about their speed. If there was a person walking in the night who bumped into them, he would only think that it was a sudden gust of wind that swept past him in an instant. The first stop was a secret branch in a city in the south. Out of professional habit, Tang In never underestimated any target opponent, let alone the Temple of Light, which had 1,000 years of history. Therefore, even though Owens, who was familiar with the inside of the temple, was leading the way, and there was a simple topographic map sent by the second prince, Tang In still decided to collect as much information about the temple as possible before he took action. However, he did not expect that before Tang In arrived at the branch to take action, someone would come to him first, and it was an old friend who had been waiting here for a long time. F***CK. Why are you here? You be *TCH. Nonsense. Of course I'm waiting for you. This is the secret branch closest to the South Bank. I guess that you would definitely come here. Huh, am I very smart? It's hard to say if you're smart or not, but your dog nose is indeed quite sensitive. F***CK off. Late at night, in a small city in the south near the Lano River, In an inconspicuous courtyard, two figures derided and hugged each other. It was a familiar rhythm, a familiar tone. Looking at this very familiar old friend in front of him, Thief Jack. Even though Tang had been in a very bad mood along the way, he could not help but smile happily, and his mood improved a lot. Then, after Jack, Harry, Luke, and a group of acquaintances greeted each other jokingly and teasingly, Tang asked, "By the way, why are you waiting for me here?" TSK, don't mention it. It was a very normal question, but Jack's face was full of depression when he heard this, and he poured out his grievances. "Bro, I'm having an unlucky year. Previously, the North was a mess, and King ran into trouble every 2 or 3 days. If I wasn't caught, I was surrounded. In the end, I thought that the South was better. In the end, when I finally returned to the South, before I could catch my breath, Bran was actually defeated just like that. I heard that your Grey Coat Army and those Northern Wilderness tribes are going to invade the South again. Isn't this King bad luck? Why did I come back? Get to the point. Get to the point." "We're almost there. Wait for me to finish. I definitely can't stay in the South now. The river has been sealed, and there are soldiers everywhere. Sooner or later, there will be a big problem. I thought that the North isn't your Grey Coat Army's territory now, so I thought that I might as well go to you." At this point, Jack suddenly paused and hammered his palm. King didn't expect this. Before I could find a way, I was captured by that bastard Philip's men. Mother Philip, there still is business here. Wait. After hearing this, Tang was startled and instantly realized something. He looked thoughtfully at Jack, who was sighing and looking depressed. "So, Philip asked you to help find me?" Not long ago, when Philip went to the North to negotiate with Tang, although the result was not successful, Tang still gave Philip the contact address of a secret organization. Thinking about it this way, the truth was undoubtedly clear. It's not help, it's a threat. A threat, do you understand? Jack was so angry that his angry scolding was trembling. "I've been preparing for a few months, planning day and night, risking my life, and finally got a box of gemstones from a noble's manor. A box of gemstones. I was going to pay for the journey to the North, but he snatched it away before I could even King warm it. CK. He dragged out his tone and beat his chest while stamping his feet. Those who heard it would cry, and those who saw it would be sad." Hearing this, Tang could not help but touch his forehead. Well, Philip was really capable of doing such a thing. He calmed himself down and could not persuade him. He could only ask, "Then what's his purpose?" "Well, why didn't he come to me himself?" "That bastard said that he was being monitored 24/7 and could not leave the city. Haha, he deserves it. This is the retribution for snatching my gemstones. Point. Oh, he wants you to go to the city as soon as possible to meet him. That's right, this is the intention of his grandfather, the Sword God. It seems that he wants to talk to you about the temple headquarters." When Tang heard the first half of the sentence, he subconsciously wanted to shake his head and refuse. What a joke. He was pressed for time now. How could he have the time to meet Philip? However, after hearing the next sentence, Tang could not help but be startled. The Sword God Wu Ding meant. About the temple headquarters, if it was only the former, Tang could still harden his heart and refuse. But the latter related to his next rescue plan. Well, with Wu Ding's identity, he should not be making empty promises. After pondering for a moment, Tang An's heart suddenly moved, and he asked tentatively, "Did Philip say how we are going to get to the city?" He said that as long as we can find any long-distance teleportation formation that can lead directly to the city, it will be fine. He has already arranged for people to be ready at the spatial tower in the city, so your identity and whereabouts will not be exposed. Sure enough, this was obviously planned step by step by Philip's side, including getting Jack to pass the message. And just based on this full sincerity, it was worth meeting. Tang did not hesitate after hearing this and nodded directly. Okay, then let's go to the city first. There was indeed no reason to refuse, because the distance between the temple headquarters and the city was much closer than the current distance. Moreover, Philip's side had already settled the spatial tower in the city, so their identities would not be exposed, and they could save a lot of time that they originally needed to waste on the journey. Why not? With the change of plan, Tang In did not hesitate. Without waiting for a full cup of tea in the secret branch office, he immediately took advantage of the cover of the night to set off again. But before leaving, by the way, Jack, what do you plan to do next? Well, my suggestion is that you continue to stay here, and after we're done with our business, we will go back to the north with you. What nonsense are you talking about? Jack shook his head without thinking and waved his fist angrily. Don't joke around. I want to go to the city with you to find that bastard, and then personally take back my box of gems. Hearing this, Tang In could not help but pause. Looking at Jack, who seemed to be filled with righteous indignation, the corners of his mouth gradually raised. Of course, this was not the truth, at least not all of it. Since Philip could let Jack pass the message on his behalf, he naturally had to explain the inside story. In other words, Jack was well aware of the danger of this trip, and compared to his life, a box of gems was nothing. Patting Jack's arm, Tang In did not say anything. He only nodded and said, "Then let's go together. Let's go." Chapter 1079. When Philip was serious, he was actually quite reliable. At dawn the next day, Tang In and the others had already appeared in the capital city's spatial tower when the first glimmer of light appeared on the horizon. Jack then went up to the middle-aged magician who was guarding the array and showed him a token. The latter looked at Tang In and the others, who were dressed as mysterious people in black robes, and nodded slightly. Without asking anything, he directly said to wait for a moment, bowed, and left. After waiting for about 15 minutes, an old man in a luxurious robe with a faint noble aura hurried over. He took off his hat. "Good morning, everyone. I am Count Dino, who was sent by Sir Philip. I have been waiting for you for a long time. May I ask, who is Mr. Tang In?" To be able to say Tang Un's real name, there was no doubt that this person had been instructed by Philip. In other words, he was trustworthy. Tang In raised his hand to take off his black hoodie and nodded in return. "Good morning, Count Dino. I am Tang In." "Hello, Mr. Tang In. Sir Philip can't meet you right now, so he sent me to welcome you." "Yes, Lord Sword God has been waiting for you at the Court Castle Sanatorium for a long time." This old noble called Count Dino was swift and decisive. He didn't exchange pleasantries and went straight to the point. "If you don't have any questions, I'll send you over now." Tang In couldn't help but raise his eyebrows when he heard this. He had a general understanding of the tense situation in the capital now. He simply nodded. "Okay, then I'll have to trouble you, Count Dino. It's my pleasure. You don't have to be so polite." Pausing for a moment, Dino glanced at Harry, Luke, and the dozens of people who were standing quietly behind Twain. He spoke again. "Right now, the capital is not very peaceful. There are Imperial Guards, Garrison Dragon Knights, and other guards patrolling the city all night. So, Your Excellency, I'll listen to your arrangements, Lord Count." Tang In didn't hesitate and directly waved his hand. After all, they were new here and in someone else's territory. Even though Tang In was very confident in the gray space that he had created and believed that they could find a suitable place to settle down in the capital, it was better to avoid unnecessary trouble. "All right, everyone, please follow me." Philip's arrangements were thorough and meticulous. After leaving the spatial tower, Jack, Owens, and the other members of the gray space changed into a set of armor with the brand of certain family and became the bodyguards of a certain noble. As for Tang In, after a little disguise and a luxurious robe, he became a middle-aged civilian official in a certain department. In his bosom, there was even a document indicating his official status. A moment later, inside the carriage, looking at Tang In playing with the official badge in his hand, Count Dino, who was sitting opposite him, chuckled. "This badge is real. Long before Sir Tang In came to the capital, call me Tang In or Little Tang. Sir sounds too distant." Count Dino paused for a moment, then smiled and said, "All right, then I'll call you Little Tang." Long before you came, Sir Philip had secretly ordered people to make badges and register them in the Empire's official book. There are countless officials in the capital. As long as it's not a position that attracts attention like a department head, no one will notice if there's one more or one less person. Tangan came to a realization and chuckled. So, I'm an official of the Empire now? The kind that's authorized? Huh, how much is my monthly salary? Where do I get it? Count Dino was stunned, but he reacted quickly and shook his head with a laugh. It's not much. Little Tang, your current identity is a historian who compiles books. You're proficient in history and belong to the Empire's Archives Department. As everyone knows, this department has always been quiet, and there's not much to gain. However, ever since Sir Sword God entered the sanatorium, he's been listening to historical anecdotes to relieve his boredom. Little Tang, you can use this opportunity to get close to Sir Sword God. He paused. Of course, more importantly, I'm one of the officers in the Archives Department. So, if you're interested in getting your salary, I can point you in the right direction, huh? The atmosphere in the carriage was much more relaxed after the joke. After a slight hesitation, Count Dino looked at Tang unapologetically and said, "Oh yes, there might be people stopping the car for inspection later. If it's the Imperial Guards, their attitude might not be too good. When the time comes, just leave it to me. I hope you don't mind." It was not a matter of whether he minded or not. Count Dino did not know Tangan's temper and was worried that he would lose control and get into a conflict, exposing his identity. If that happened, not only would he be dragging him into this, he would also be letting Sir Philip down. "Don't worry, Count Dino. I'll remember that." Nodding casually, Tang In could not help but sigh again. Even though Count Dino didn't state his position clearly, the fact that he could freely enter and leave the royal castle showed that he was someone important in the capital city. But now, even such an important person was worried about being stopped for inspection. As such, one could only imagine how complicated the situation in the capital city was right now. Count Dino did not feel that way. He could not help but feel that Tang In was unreliable when he agreed so casually. He wanted to remind him, but he was worried that he would offend Lindley. In the end, he could only sigh and pray that he would not get into trouble later. Not long after, reality proved that he was thinking too much. Count Dino's warning was not in vain. The carriage was stopped several times on the way to the palace gates. The closer it was to the castle, the more frequently it was stopped. There were dragon riders from the capital city guards, as well as the royal guards. The former had a good attitude, and Count Dino was able to control the situation. The other party only looked through the window and was done with it. However, the latter was more troublesome. Not only did they stop the carriage, they even had to open the door. They were only short of pulling the two of them out of the carriage for inspection. Tang In was very cooperative throughout the process. He did not speak much, and only maintained a reserved smile on his face. Count Dino took the initiative to introduce him. However, it was this seemingly stiff and silent performance that made Count Dino secretly stunned. He was even a little impressed and puzzled. Could Lil Tang have been an imperial official in the past? It was hard to describe one's aura. It seemed mysterious and formless. However, it was real and sometimes very obvious. Ordinary people with some experience would have their own way of judging aura. In normal social interactions, it was like two strangers greeting each other for the first time. There was no need to get to know each other. Just from the other party's appearance, expression, words, and actions, one would have the first impression that this person was a famous chef. Oh, that person seemed to be a blacksmith with a huge hammer. Tang In's current performance gave people the impression that he was a living civil official. His official position was not so high that it was frightening, but in terms of status, it was definitely higher than the Imperial Guards. Therefore, he had a faint and reserved smile on his face, as if he was maintaining his status. On the other hand, his status did not matter in the eyes of the Imperial Guards. At this time and place, the other party could suppress him within the scope of their duties. Therefore, he was stiff and silent, keeping a low profile and modest. His mentality, actions, expression, and status were mixed together and balanced, forming Tang In's current perfect civil official aura. The Dragon Riders and Imperial Guards did not find any flaws. Even if they felt that he was unfamiliar, they would not suspect anything. They simply asked about his identity and looked at his official badge, then naturally waved their hands and let him pass. All right, let's not talk about Count Dino's suspicions about Tang Un's true identity for now. And there really wasn't much to say about this. With Tang Un's current level of disguise, forget about a small civil official. Even if he was given an imperial crown, he would still be able to sit on the throne like a king and suppress all sides. After a while, the carriage stopped in front of the palace's castle. At this time, half of the rising sun had already peeked out from the horizon, and the morning light gradually rose. However, it was still not time to open the castle's main gates, so Tang Un and the other entered from the side door. There were no disturbances. Their identities were verified, their names were registered, and a series of other procedures were completed in just a few minutes. Then, Tang Un officially stepped into the heart of the brand's royal authority for the first time. Without looking around, Tang Un's face did not have any expression of curiosity or surprise. He was calm and indifferent. This was not strange. Although it was his first time stepping into the castle, it did not mean that he did not know what was inside the castle. The last time he came to the capital, because he had the intention to assassinate the king, he had studied this place for more than half a month. He was just one step away from taking action. Along the way, they stopped and turned through doors. Finally, Count Dino brought Tang Un to the southwest corner of the castle. In front of him was a large building with a white exterior wall. It was the Empire's Royal Castle Sanatorium. Here, Count Dino handed a stack of yellowed ancient books that he had carried down from the carriage to Tang Un. He took a deep breath of the morning fog and said, "Remember, little Tang Un, your current name is Isfin. Your identity is the historian of the Empire's Archives Department. I invited you here to explain history to the Sword God. Do not be nervous later. Do not show any fear, understand?" Tang Un rubbed his nose. Of course, he was not nervous. Count Dino, on the other hand, could not hide his nervousness and fear. Of course, this was human nature. After all, the royal castle was controlled by the First Prince's faction. If something went wrong, it was easy to imagine what would happen to Count Dino and his family. Tang Un wanted to comfort him, but he was worried that it would backfire. In the end, he could only nod solemnly. After making some preparations, the two of them walked towards the main entrance of the sanatorium. Just as they approached, several eagle gazes turned to them. Lord Dino, why are you here so early today?" "Yesterday, huh? I reached the key point yesterday. Sword God seemed to want to continue, so I thought to come earlier today." "Ha!" Even though he had been panting heavily to adjust himself, Count Dino was still nervous when faced with the suspicious gazes of the guards. He laughed dryly and spoke with a trembling voice. "Oh, after all, Count Dino often came here, so the guard did not immediately suspect him. However, when his gaze turned to Twain, his gaze suddenly froze. This looks unfamiliar. I've never seen you before. Don't tell me you're Lord Dino's attendant? Let me introduce myself. I am Iswin." Tang Un could tell that Count Dino was unreliable. Thus, he took a step forward and nodded with a simple salute. He smiled reservedly and said, "I am not Lord Dino's follower. I am his subordinate, a historian in the Imperial Archives Department." "Yes, Lord Iswin is an outstanding historian in our department. He is proficient in history. Thus, I brought him here today to see if he is to Sword God's liking." With Tang Un's interruption, Count Dino finally regained his composure and took the opportunity to introduce himself. "I see. Yes. May I see Lord Dino's official badge?" "Haha. I hope Lord Dino does not mind. After all, we are responsible for Sword God's safety." "Of course, no problem." Twain took out his official badge and handed it to this guard who was dressed as a royal guard, but whose body was faintly emanating the power of light. There was no problem with the badge, and the person matched. In addition, Tang Un had the aura of a civil official. The guard, who was probably a temple knight, did not make things difficult for him. After a few polite words, he handed back his official badge and waved his hand to let them pass. Following behind Count Dino, who was obviously relieved, Tang Un stepped into the Imperial Sanatorium without any change in his expression. Then he scanned his surroundings, and his eyes flashed. This sanatorium was a place for the important figures of the royal family to recuperate. The environment was naturally not bad. At a glance, there were flowers and plants everywhere, surrounded by strange trees. Stepping into this place, he felt that the air seemed to be fresher. There was a faint fragrance floating in the air. Overall, it looked more like a large, quiet, and elegant garden. However, this was only on the surface. Tang's sharp senses told him that this place did not feel like a garden. Instead, it felt more like a mountain of knives and a sea of fire. There was a deadly aura everywhere. Of course, given the importance of this place, it was normal for it to be guarded so tightly. However, the hidden aura, both strong and weak, carried the scent of light fighting aura and light magic. This was thought-provoking. Tang sighed almost imperceptibly. He thought about his impression of Wu Ding's undisguised dislike of the Temple of Light, and then looked at the fact that even the place where he was recuperating was surrounded by them. He could not help but shake his head inwardly. He felt a little aggrieved for the sword god who once dominated the world. All right, this was also a feeling. He seemed to have a lot of feelings after coming to the capital. However, it did not matter. Soon, he would not have such feelings anymore. We're here. This is the sword god's room for recuperation. Count Dino pointed at the exquisite loft several feet in front of him. He paused, then lowered his voice and said, "There are no guards here because the sword god does not like. You go in first. I'll wait here." There were indeed no guards around this loft, including the members of the Temple of Light who were hiding in the shadows. This was not strange. The sword god was the sword god after all. No matter how awkward the situation was, as long as he did not want to, no one would be able to step on his head while he was alive. Tang nodded and did not reply. He took a slight breath and instantly cleared his mind of all distracting thoughts. Then he stepped forward. Behind him, at an angle where Count Dino could not see, a pitch-black dagger slid out silently. Chapter 1080. After all, the sword god was the sword god. The meaning of this sentence was not only applicable to the entire empire and the Temple of Light, but also to the current Tang. Yes, the sword god Wu Ding was old now, and he was indeed on the verge of death due to his serious injuries. However, this did not mean anything. As long as he could still breathe at this moment, he could raise his sword and kill in the next moment, and he would definitely succeed. There's almost no doubt about this. Therefore, Tang was very careful. Regardless of whether it was taking a step or raising his hand to push the door open, the black dagger in his left sleeve constantly trembled and shimmered, like the tongue of a venomous snake that was constantly retracting, ready to strike. The next moment, he pushed the door and entered. The exquisite attic looked like a two-story building from the outside, but after entering, it was not so. There was only one story, so it was very impressive. The room was a little dark, but also very warm, mixed with a strong medicinal smell. In the quiet atmosphere, only the sound of the heaters in the corners could be heard. In the depths of the room, surrounded by heavy curtains, a thin old man leaned against the head of the bed like a statue. His thin and yellow face reflected the brilliance of the candlelight beside him, and it could not hide the lethargy. Only the pair of eyes that were fixed on him were turbid, but could not hide the light in them. Bang, the door closed. "Little Tang, you're here." The old man's voice was very weak and tired, but also seemed to carry a faint joy of relief. He bowed and saluted. "Yes, long time no see, Elder Wu." Tang came to the capital on the spur of the moment, and there was no delay along the way, so it was impossible for anyone to inform Wu Ding in advance. However, for people at their level of strength, it did not matter whether they were informed or not. Tang believed that Wu Ding immediately sensed him when he stepped into the attic area. Therefore, it was not strange for them to have such a natural and familiar conversation. "Sit." Wu Ding raised his hand slightly and looked at the seat beside the bed. "You're welcome. I'll just stand here for a while." With his back against the door, Tang In waved his hand and refused without thinking. What a joke. This distance was already dangerous enough. If he wasn't courting death, then what was? Of course, this didn't mean that Tang In was certain that Wu Ding would definitely make a move. If that was the case, he wouldn't have come at all. The actual situation was the opposite. Based on the current situation, Wu Ding had no reason to attack him. However, as the saying goes, it's better to be safe than sorry. Tang In was also scared. In the previous battle on the river, Wu Ding also did not have a reason to perish together with Tang In. However, he still chose to fight in a way that was close to mutual destruction. Therefore, Tang In could not afford to be careless now. Wu Ding was slightly startled when he heard this. He immediately understood and smiled. He did not insist. He nodded and said, "That's it then. Ahem. I remember asking you a question before. If you were to assassinate me, what would you choose to do? Your answer is that you don't need to do anything. You just need to live longer than me." "Ha! You are right. I have lost." Tang In touched his nose and shook his head. "You haven't lost, and no one can defeat you. Moreover, losing time is the most glorious way to lose in this world." "Oh, this flattery is novel and pleasant to hear." Wu Ding raised the corners of his mouth and pretended to be happy. But then he sighed and shook his head. "But if I had a choice, I would rather be defeated a little earlier or be defeated directly by you and Bamatu. That way, I may leave with more peace of mind." Tang In was silent. Of course, he knew the meaning of these words. However, he could not intervene in this matter, nor could he care about it. It was not too much to say that it was Wu Ding's own family matter. "Well, let's not talk about this first." After a moment of silence, Wu Ding took the lead to break the silence. "I invited little Tang here this time because I want to make a deal with you." He waved his hand. "There is no such thing as a deal. Elder Wu, if you have any orders, just say it. As long as it is within my power, I will definitely help you." This was not Tang In being pretentious or playing the trick of retreating in order to advance. It was sincere. In fact, there was no personal grudge between Tang In and Wu Ding. Even when Tang In beat up Wu Ding's last disciple, when they first met, Wu Ding did not seek revenge after the incident. Instead, he dealt with it impartially. Based on this point alone, Tang In respected Wu Ding's moral character very much. There is no need for that. After all, you and I have different standpoints. Personal friendship is personal friendship. If there should be a deal, it should be a deal. Moreover, I am taking advantage of you in this matter. After a pause, Wu Ding looked straight at Tang In. "I want to use a sword to exchange for 2 of your promises. 1 for 2. In terms of quantity alone, it was naturally an advantage. However, Tang In's expression did not change. He spread out his hands and invited, "Please speak. First, kill Wensilin." Tang In was stunned when he heard this. After reacting, he frowned slightly and was somewhat puzzled. "It's not a big problem, but why don't you clean up the sect yourself?" This was indeed a question. Betraying one's sect was an extremely serious matter, whether it was in a modern world or in another world. Moreover, Wensilin had not only betrayed his sect, he had also ambushed and assassinated his senior brother, Haita. This was equivalent to directly destroying the Sword God's lineage. No matter which sect it was, such a traitor who had committed heinous crimes was a target that had to be killed. Moreover, it had to be the sect that killed him and cleaned up the sect. Otherwise, they would not be able to pick up their face. With Wu Ding's strength, even if he was on the verge of death, it would still be very easy for him to kill Wensilin. It was just a matter of raising his hand and doing it in a matter of minutes. And even if he didn't want to or couldn't bear to do it, with his prestige as the Sword God, as long as he spread the word, there would be martial warriors experts who would come out and kill Wensilin. Therefore, no matter how he thought about it, this matter shouldn't have fallen on Tang In's head. Kill him. Wu Ding's lifeless face was indifferent from the beginning to the end, but when this matter was mentioned, the corner of his eyes couldn't help but twitch. He seemed to be thinking of the eldest disciple who had limited talent, but had always been mature and prudent, as well as the last disciple who had outstanding talent, but couldn't help but be useless. His wrinkles that were like mountains and rivers trembled, and there was an abyss-like sorrow hidden within them. After a long while, he took a deep breath and closed his eyes slightly. "You've dirted my sword." His voice was faint, but Tang In could obviously hear the heart-piercing coldness in it. He simply nodded and said, "All right, I'll help you with this matter." Indeed, it wasn't a big problem. If Wen Silin wasn't Wu Ding's disciple, Tang In would have already killed him several times over. It seemed that he didn't want to mention or hear anything about that person anymore, including his name. He was afraid that he would dirty his mouth again. After taking a few breaths, Wu Ding continued, "Second, if the empire is destroyed one day, make sure that my family is safe." Tang In was stunned again when he heard this. He stared blankly at the exhausted Wu Ding and was silent for a moment. To be honest, Tang In had guessed Wu Ding's request just now. It included letting the Gray Code army form an alliance with the Bran, or letting him assassinate important figures of the Northern Wilderness tribes to help the Bran Empire continue to struggle at death's door, and so on. This wasn't a wild guess, but a conjecture drawn from Wu Ding's standpoint and style. He was the Bran's god of swords. He had already dedicated his life to this empire. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that if it weren't for him, the Bran Empire would have collapsed long ago. But now, such a guardian deity-like existence was no longer considering the Empire's situation, but the safety of his own family. This wasn't sarcasm, but pure bewilderment. But when he thought about it, it was actually normal. He was the god of swords, the #1 expert in the world. But at the same time, he was also an ordinary person. He had his own 7 emotions and 6 desires, joys and sorrows. In this chaotic world, it was only natural that he would first consider the safety of his family. Of course, more importantly, the current situation in the capital and the recent actions of the First Prince's faction had undoubtedly enraged this old man who had protected the empire for most of his life. So on the verge of death, Wu Ding had made such a decision. Understanding this point, Tang In once again agreed. "No problem. Actually, with my relationship with Philip, if it really comes to that, I won't just stand by and watch." "Good. Let's talk about the Temple of Light next." Seeing Tang In nod in agreement, Wu Ding smiled gratefully. Then, he changed the topic to the issue that Tang In was most concerned about. "I've heard about your little lover, and I've also asked someone to inquire about it. If you want to safely rescue her and the child in her womb, you must kill that hypocritical old man." "Hypocritical old man? You've always said..." After a pause, Tang In's expression suddenly changed. "The Pope." Wu Ding nodded. Tang In was completely stunned, but he didn't stay stunned for long. After quickly recovering, he looked suspiciously at Wu Ding. "Is it really necessary to make such a big fuss?" Tang In couldn't help but be suspicious. As far as he knew, Wu Ding and the lineage of the God of Swords had never been on good terms with the Temple of Light. Now that he had made such a statement, could it be that he wanted to kill with a borrowed knife? "It's very necessary." With Wu Ding's experience, of course, he could guess what Tang In was thinking. He raised his hand and explained calmly. "As far as I know, your little lover is not restricted in the Temple of Light headquarters, and she's living a good life. Do you know why? This is because there's a prohibition on her, a magic prohibition that was personally placed by that hypocritical old man. Unless you can cut off the scepter that never leaves his hand or kill him directly, she will die even if you can save her from the Temple of Light headquarters." "What the..." Tang In was furious when he heard this, and he couldn't help but feel frustrated. Compared to saving Sylvia from the Temple of Light headquarters and killing the Pope, the latter was definitely more difficult. And to be honest, Tang In had never considered the possibility of a direct confrontation with the Temple of Light. It was important to know one's own limits. The 1,000 years of heritage of the Temple of Light was not a joke, not to mention that they were now on the enemy's main battlefield. Not to mention him, even the God of Swords in front of him, Wu Ding, couldn't do this. So this time, Tang In came with the purpose of quietly stealing Sylvia from the Temple of Light headquarters. But now, this matter, it seemed, was really going to be a big deal. Chapter 1081. The Pope. How strong is he? After a moment of silence, Tang Yen asked in a muffled voice. In the end, Tang Yen was still a pragmatic person who had seen great storms. So although he was depressed, since what was done could not be undone, he could only face it head-on. Moreover, plans could not keep up with the pace of changes, and Tang Yen was basically used to it. Anyway, since he came to the other world, perhaps because he was not acclimatized, his luck had not been good many times, the strength of that hypocritical old man. Wu Ding raised his eyebrows slightly, thought for a moment, and nodded affirmatively without hiding the look of disdain on his face. A complete mess. Ahem. Tang Yen smiled bitterly. Elder Wu, can we be more objective? Of course, Tang Yen did not believe Wu Ding's evaluation. The Pope was a character who controlled the Millennium Temple. Even if he was not as strong as the God of Swords Wu Ding, he should not have fallen to such a state. Right? What I said is the objective truth. Wu Ding looked at Tang Yen with a dissatisfied look and explained with a twitch of his mouth. I admit that the temple's training system is good, very complete, and has its own unique style. Whether it is light magic or holy fighting aura, they're good points. But no matter if it is a warrior or a mage, no matter how outstanding the talent is, if they do not spend time to train quietly and constantly sharpen themselves in life and death battles, they will not have any achievements. Well, you're a freak, a pervert. You're not included in this. Tang Yen touched his nose and smiled bitterly again. But not everyone is like you. That hypocritical old man is in charge of a huge force that has a history of 1,000 years. He has more than 10 million clergymen under him. He has trivial matters to attend to all day long. Even when he has nothing to do, he can still cause trouble to show off. Do you think he has the time to cultivate his strength? Tang Yen's heart skipped a beat when he heard that. He touched his chin thoughtfully and said, that seems to be the case. Phew, it's not like it's the truth. Wu Ding obviously had a lot of opinions about the existence of the Pope and the entire temple. Hearing this, he took a deep breath and emphasized again. Then he saw Tang Yen nodding his head with conviction. Only then did his expression soften. Then the tone of his voice changed as he continued, of course, the mess I'm talking about is his fighting strength, not his actual strength. When Tang Yen heard this, he almost choked. Then he looked at Wu Ding, who acted as if nothing had happened, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. He twitched the corner of his mouth and said, Elder Wu, you can't tease people like this. If you have something to say, can't you say it all at once? Perhaps it was because the matter after his death had been settled. Compared to Tang Yen's lethargy when he first entered the room, Wu Ding's complexion was obviously much better now. He smiled and looked at Tang Yen innocently. I'm old, so I naturally speak slower. Little Tang, you're still too impatient. Well, he's even making a false accusation. Tang Yen touched his nose and bowed politely. Please enlighten me, Elder Wu. Well, then I'll enlighten you. Stroking his white beard, Wu Ding nodded with satisfaction. By the way, where was I just now? Phew! Calm down, calm down. I'm not angry. I won't lower myself to the level of this dying old man. Oh, I remember the problem of strength. Like I said just now, the temple's training system is not bad, especially those little tricks of pretending to be mysterious. Well, they have a secret method that can accumulate the strength of many people on one thing. And then through this thing, with the help of several other rare tools, they can directly inject the strength into the body of a designated person and directly raise the strength of that person. Do Qi and magic can do it, but the power of Do Qi is too overbearing and unstable. A normal person's body can't bear it all, but light magic is different. In this aspect, the temple's research is very deep, and the process of a secret method is already mature, so there's basically no mistake. Of course, the cost of using this shortcut secret method is not small, so it's basically only suitable for the upper echelons of the temple, such as the Pope and the Cardinal. This was the real secret. If it wasn't for Elder Wu, no one would know that there was such a way to reap without sowing in this world. But Tang Yen frowned when he heard this, and his expression was thoughtful, because he felt that this secret technique was slightly familiar when he heard it. Doesn't it sound familiar? Wu Ding saw through Tang Yen's thoughts, smiled, and said, "That's right, the temple's secret method was stolen from the sacrificial method of the northern wilderness tribes." Haha, it's funny that a group of hypocrites who talk about benevolence, righteousness, and morality, while scolding the other side for being evil and heresy, secretly stole the evil secret method from the other side. Haha, don't you think it's funny? Tang and suddenly understood. Wasn't that right? Both of them took the shortcut route of turning external forces into their own. The so-called difference was just the choice of target. The northern wilderness tribes drew power from the bodies of magical beasts, while the Temple of Light directly stole power from other people's bodies, spoiling things through excessive enthusiasm. Taking a deep breath, Tang Yin frowned. There should be a limit to the level of strength that this secret method can raise, right? Of course, otherwise the number one expert on the continent would be him and not me. Snorting, Wu Ding said matter-of-factly, "This kind of secret method is also divided into levels, and the highest level is of course only that hypocritical old man can use it. In terms of strength, he's about the same as me. But if he wants to fight me one-on-one, as long as the battlefield isn't in the temple's headquarters, I'll cut him in half with my sword." This wasn't Wu Ding looking down on the other side or boasting. Tang Yin could also understand the meaning behind it. That was, the outcome of a battle was never determined by the level of strength of both sides. This was only one of the important factors. In addition, both sides will to fight, experience, and so on could affect the outcome of the battle. To put it bluntly, the Pope, who lived like a prince, had probably only left the temple's headquarters a few times in his life, and the experience of fighting with others was even rarer. But Wu Ding was different. His reputation as the god of swords that shook the continent was earned through real battles. In his life, there were countless battles, big and small, and he dominated the world with a single sword, causing a reign of terror. With such a disparity in experience, the outcome was naturally different. Nodding in understanding, Tang Un's eyebrows suddenly moved, and he instantly grasped the key point. "You just said that as long as the battlefield isn't in the temple's headquarters. What's the difference?" "The difference is too big." Wu Ding first gave Tang in an admiring look, then sighed softly. "The Temple of Light and the Empire are interdependent, and they already have 1,000 years of history. So they have 1,000 years of foundation. The biggest foundation is the location of the temple's headquarters." "What do you mean?" "The temple's headquarters is located in the east of the capital, about a few hundred miles away. You'll know when you go there. It's a place without shadows. To make a simple analogy, if a wall is erected there, unless it's noon, there will always be a difference between the two sides of the wall facing the sun and the shadow, right? But the temple's headquarters is not like that. The concentration and activity of the light elements there has reached a terrifying level. Even if the sun only shines from one side, there won't be any shadows under the shadow of the wall. It's bright and transparent. Fighting in such an environment, as long as the strength of the clergy has reached earth rank and above, and has the ability to mobilize the light elements outside of their body, they will never have to worry about the problem of energy exhaustion and will continue to fight. And those who have reached the level of the hypocritical old man are in an invincible position there. Other than that, others won't be able to do it. Even with my strength, I won't be able to mobilize the slightest bit of fighting energy in that place, because there isn't any." As soon as he finished speaking, even Tang Yin, who had a deep understanding of the concept of home advantage, could not help but suck in a breath of cold air. What did this mean? To make an inappropriate analogy, if the battle between outsiders and the clergy in the temple's headquarters was compared to a gunfight in the modern world, it was equivalent to one side having limited ammunition and being overcautious. One side had countless ammunition and was going all out. What was the suspense in a battle with such a huge disparity in strength? Wasn't this blatant cheating? But, looking at Twain's ever-changing expression, the corners of Wu Ding's mouth curled up, revealing a mischievous smile, and changed his tone once again. That hypocritical old fellow, if someone else were to go there, that person would definitely be courting death. But if you were to assassinate him, you might have some confidence. Of course, only some confidence. Chapter 1082. Author's note: 5,000 words, 2 chapters combined into one. The raccoon's paw is saved. Noon. Tang Yin and Count Dino stayed at the Empire Sanatorium for half a day. They even had lunch there before packing up and preparing to leave. Don't get me wrong, Tang Yin and Wu Ding did not talk for long. It was only half an hour from start to finish. For the rest of the time, Count Dino told Wu Ding some historical events, as usual. Tang Yin listened quietly on the side. Then, he looked at Wu Ding, who would occasionally show a look of melancholy, and his expression became thoughtful. Count Dino's content was not random nonsense. Instead, he strictly followed the timeline and explained the history of the Bran Empire from nothing to its present state. It was about 1,000 years of history. Wu Ding's body was in a desperate situation, and he did not have much time left. If he guessed correctly, Count Dino probably wanted to use this method to see the empire that he had protected for most of his life one last time. There was nothing strange about it. Old people basically had nothing to worry about. They were only afraid that their memories would be delayed. But right now, what Tang Yin said was also a form of disguise. They met as usual and talked about historical events as usual. In the end, they naturally walked out of the Empire Sanatorium and left the palace castle as usual. On the way back, Tang Yin was a little quiet in the car. He was not continuing to lament about Wu Ding's slightly bleak past. To be honest, there was nothing to lament about. Birth, old age, illness, and death were human nature. As the person involved, Wu Ding understood it very well. As an outsider, Tang Yin naturally had no reason to worry about it. Tang Yin was only thinking about the content of Wu Ding's words earlier. Others had no hope of assassinating the Pope. They could not even sneak into the temple headquarters. But if it was him, there was indeed a possibility. Wu Ding's words were not without reason. In terms of infiltration, with Tang Yin's skills as an assassin, even if it was the terrifying Divine Hall headquarters, he should have some confidence to sneak in. Or it should be said that if there were people in the world who could successfully sneak into the Divine Hall headquarters, Tang Yin must be one of them. There was no doubt about it, because it was a professional. This was Tang Yin's previous plan. If he wanted to quietly rescue Sylvia, he had to first sneak into the temple headquarters. However, the situation had changed. Sneaking into the temple headquarters was no longer a matter of victory or defeat, but a prerequisite. Killing the Pope was the key to solving the problem. Apart from Tang Yin, there were other people in the world who could sneak into the Divine Hall headquarters. If he wanted to assassinate the Pope, only Tang Yin alone had a chance of succeeding. This was what Wu Ding had said, and it was also a reasonable explanation. Because Tang Yin's speed was the fastest. A more detailed explanation was that in the territory of the Divine Hall headquarters, if he were to fight with the Pope, who had the home advantage, there was no hope at all. Because the longer the battle dragged on, the greater the advantage of the Pope, who had almost unlimited power and elements. Even if Wu Ding came in person with a sword, the result would be the same. Therefore, if he wanted to successfully kill the Pope, he had to sneak attack, assassinate, and fight quickly. After all, the Pope was old, and he had little experience in fighting with people. In the face of sudden changes, his on-the-spot reaction would certainly not be fast. He was probably no different from an ordinary person. He should also be aware of this. So the Pope never left the Divine Hall headquarters and never put himself in an unprotected and dangerous situation. And this was Tang Yin's opportunity. Only Tang Yin had the opportunity to operate. He was a killer, an assassin. He was proficient in infiltration, and he was good at fighting quickly. As long as he could successfully sneak into the Divine Hall headquarters and find a way to get within 3 feet of the Pope, he could suddenly attack and seize the opportunity before the Pope could react. It was not impossible to kill him in one shot. Of course, things were always easier said than done, not to mention assassinating the Pope, who controlled the Divine Hall for 1,000 years, and in someone else's territory. The success rate was too low, so low that it was negligible. Little Tang, what do you think of our next itinerary? Oh, In the carriage, looking at the palace castle far behind them, Count Dino, who had a lingering fear, finally calmed down a little and took the lead to break the silence in the carriage. Tang Yin, who was sitting opposite him and frowning silently, looked up blankly, his eyes in a daze. Obviously, he did not hear what he asked clearly. "Sorry, Count, what did you say just now?" Count Dino did not mind. He waved his hand and said, "It's like this. After meeting the God of Swords, Sir Philip will find time to come to my manor to meet you again, but it will be at night. So in the afternoon, should I send you back to the manor and wait there? Or should little Tang follow me to the Empire's Archives Department and stay there for a while?" "Let's go to the Empire's Archives Department." Tang muttered to himself and instantly understood what the Count was thinking. He smiled politely and said, "Sorry to trouble you, Count." He had to go all the way. After all, Tang was a new face, and now he had shown his face in the Empire Sanatorium. In order to prevent people with ulterior motives from investigating, he naturally had to show his face in the Empire's Archives Department. It was safest to finish what he had started. "Haha, it's no trouble, it's what I should do. Then shall we go to the Empire's Archive Department now? Don't worry, I've arranged everything there. Nothing will go wrong." Count Dino was overjoyed when he heard this. In fact, this was the best outcome for him, because once Tang Yin's identity was suspected, Tang Yin could leave, but he, who had a family and a name, could not escape being implicated. With this interruption, Tang Yin did not continue to think about the problem just now. After all, from the current situation, assassinating the Pope was still very far away, and he still had not figured out how to sneak into the temple headquarters. Tang Yin picked up a corner of the curtain and looked around. The terrain and environment were quite familiar, and a vague place name appeared in his mind. It seemed to be a commercial street. However, compared to the bustling scene he saw the last time he was here, the streets and shops were obviously much more deserted. It was noon, and the bustling capital was supposed to be the most crowded time of the day. However, at a glance, there were more people riding horses on the street than in carriages, and more people wearing armor than ordinary clothes. They were in a hurry, and the atmosphere was tense and somber. Just as Tang Yin shook his head and put down the curtain, the speeding car suddenly slowed down, and the neighing of horses entered through the window. Damn it! Another inspection, never ending. Count Dino's face darkened as he complained in a low voice. Tang Yin shrugged and did not say anything, nor did he take it to heart. They had encountered this situation many times before, and it was nothing more than a random inspection. Fortunately, it was daytime now, and the inspection was obviously much weaker. One had to know that when they came in the morning, the inspection basically stopped every 10 minutes or so. It was truly endless. After a while, the carriage came to a complete stop. Then, the sound of horse hooves approached, and two polite knocks came from outside the carriage window. "Guard dragon riders," Count Dino muttered, his expression clearly more relaxed. As mentioned earlier, there were two main inspection forces in the capital. One was the guard dragon riders, similar to the guard cavalry of an ordinary city. The other was the royal guards from the palace castle. The former's authority was much lower than the latter's, so their attitude was relatively gentler. They would usually just knock on the window and look through the curtains when inspecting eye-catching carriages. If it was the latter, they would be hard to say. Even if they knew it was an imperial official, they would still have to open the carriage door. "Excuse me, routine inspection." "Oh, Count Dino? You are the Dragon Riders of the capital's second guard hall, Bugnes. It's my duty, and I hope you can understand." "Oh, it's Captain Bugnes. You've worked hard. Please inspect." Although he was impatient with the endless inspection, when the carriage window was rolled down and he faced the inspectors, Count Dino's attitude was still very good. His words were polite and gentle. It couldn't be helped. It was better to be in charge than to be in charge. The vigorous middle-aged man called Bugnes didn't hesitate. Although he said that he didn't dare, his sharp eyes were already scanning the inner walls of the carriage. In the end, he fixed his gaze on Tang Yin, who was looking up at him, and met the latter's slightly surprised gaze. It wasn't Bugnes who asked, but a muscular one-eyed man behind Bugnes. He was rubbing his red nose. He looked at Tang In and suddenly asked, "Iswin, the imperial historian of the Imperial Archives." Tang In blinked. His gaze swept past Bugnes and the one-eyed man, and he took the initiative to introduce himself. "So it's Lord Iswin." "Hello, hello." Bugnes greeted him politely. Count Dino looked at Tang, in surprise. After all, he was the one who introduced himself when they were inspected. He didn't think too much about it. He looked at Bugnes in a reserved manner and said, "There's only the two of us here. Captain Bugnes, do you want to come in and inspect?" "Haha, no need. No need." Bugnes laughed and waved his hand. He glanced at the one-eyed man, who nodded slightly and waved his hand. "Let me in." I'm sorry, Lord Dino. It's fine. You're just doing your duty. The defense of the capital depends on you now." After exchanging some pleasantries, the carriage window rolled down, and the carriage slowly moved forward. "What, little Tang, do you know the Captain Bugnes?" Count Dino couldn't help but guess in surprise when he saw Tang In lift the curtain again and look behind him with narrowed eyes. "Sort of." After a slight pause, Tang In didn't hide anything. He sighed with a strange expression. "An old acquaintance, but we haven't seen each other in a long time." They were indeed old acquaintances, and they hadn't seen each other in a long time. The middle-aged man was indeed called Bugnes. As for the one-eyed man who was rubbing his red nose, he was called Bose. They were the gang members, assassins, and other villains in Lian City who terrorized the underground world. They were also the two people who gave Tang In a headache when he first arrived in the other world. This situation continued until Tang In's strength increased. They worked together to kill a bounty hunter before their relationship eased slightly. However, it was around that time that Tang In didn't continue to interact with them. He had always thought that the two of them were still in one of the cities in the north and were still working together as the chief of guards and the chief of cavalry. He never thought that they would actually come to the southern capital and coincidentally bump into him on the road. Thinking about the general route Tang In took after he arrived in the other world, Little Rock Village, Lian City, the north, and now the capital of Bran, he was involved in more than half of it. Such a coincidence really made him wonder if they were fated to meet, even though they were thousands of miles apart, or enemies were bound to meet on a narrow road. However, there was one thing that could be confirmed. Their identities, state of mind, and strength were different from before when they met again in the other world. To give an obvious example, he still remembered the first time Tang In disguised himself in front of Bose. The latter immediately saw through him. However, Tang In was sitting calmly now. He was less than 10 feet away from Bose and was sizing each other up with great interest. The latter was completely indifferent and didn't notice any flaws. What a difference, all right? Tang In was a little happy in his heart. It was similar to the feeling of returning home in glory and glory. It was similar to the feeling of returning to the beginner's village after reaching the max level in an online game and seeing the mini-boss that tortured him to death. All right, back to the main topic. The carriage arrived at the Empire's Archives Department. After Tang In showed his face again, he naturally wouldn't stay there for long. At around 3 in the afternoon, Count Dino brought him back to the manor and met up with Jack, Harry, and the others who came early in the morning. The next step was to wait. Wait for Philip to come and meet him. This kid asked him to come over in such a serious manner. He must have something up his sleeve. Besides, the capital was his home ground. With him around, Tang In and the others would have a much easier time. Moreover, the temple headquarters wasn't far from here. He must be familiar with it. All in all, there would definitely be a need for him in the next operation. Of course, waiting was not an option. In the side hall arranged by Count Dino, everyone gathered and laid out the map and the relevant information. Tang In then briefly conveyed Wu Ding's suggestion. The operation to assassinate the Pope officially began. Assassinate the Pope. Boss, do we really have to go this far? That was why there was a saying that a general would lead a soldier like his own. After Tang In changed the target of this trip, everyone was silent for a while. Harry helplessly held his forehead and sighed, saying the same thing as Tang In did before. Nonsense. Do you think I want to do this? Aren't we forced to do this? Tang In rolled his eyes and glanced at the speechless people around him. He waved his hand and said, "All right, let's not talk about this. Let's think about how to sneak into the temple headquarters first." It had to be said that none of the people present were timid. Gray space was taught by Tangan. They didn't know how to spell the word timid. Jack was also a fierce man who had picked hundreds of locks and stolen thousands of houses. As long as there were enough benefits, he would even dare to steal from the gallows. As for Owens, there was no need to even mention him. Now that he was engaged in a fierce battle with the Church of Light, he naturally would not be afraid of his old master. With such a group of weirdos gathered together, the shocking news of the assassination of the Pope was quickly digested and absorbed. Then, they began to discuss the feasibility of the plan. Looking at the map, it doesn't seem difficult. The temple headquarters is on an isolated island surrounded by water. It seems that there is no way to go, but isn't the water route the biggest flaw? How about we dive over? The area is a bit big. The distance is too far. Can we swim over? We can't swim over, but Boss can. That's true? No. When everyone quickly came up with the first feasible plan to discuss, Owens suddenly frowned and rejected it. It's not that easy to sneak into the temple headquarters. At least, it's definitely not possible to dive over. You may not know that in the boundless waters around the temple headquarters, except for the waters near the two shores, there is not even a decent fish. Do you know why? He looked around. For thousands of years, the temple headquarters has set up countless magic traps underwater. It's not an exaggeration to say that it's as dangerous as hell's magma. Anyone who wants to dive over will definitely die. Damn, so ruthless, you can imagine it. After all, they have thousands of years of heritage. If we really dive over, the temple headquarters would have been stolen many times. Jack started from his own profession and gave a professional evaluation. So we can't do it in the air? Aren't you talking nonsense? The people in the temple headquarters are not blind. If we swagger over in the air, we will definitely be blasted into pieces. What if we use spatial means? Doesn't Boss know how to teleport? Tangan heard this and was slightly moved. He touched his chin thoughtfully and looked at Owens. Unfortunately, Owens shook his head again. The temple headquarters did not lock down the space because there is a teleportation portal on the island. However, there are too many mages in the headquarters. Any spatial fluctuations on the island will not escape their sharp senses. We will still be exposed. Harry scratched his head. Damn it. If we can't do it underwater, in the air, or in space, how can we sneak in? Tangan looked at the map and thought for a moment. He asked, Owens, how do the clergymen on the island communicate with the outside world? Do they all use the teleportation portal? Of course not. The teleportation portal costs a lot for each teleportation. Even if the temple headquarters has thousands of years of heritage, they can't afford it. Owen shook his head and pointed at the map. There are 4 large docks on the 4 sides of the island. There are even more docks on the opposite shore. The 2 sides are connected by boats. There are fixed trips every day to send people back and forth. Smack! As soon as he finished speaking, Harry slammed his palm. There are boats? That's easy. As long as we control a few clergymen of the same size, we can disguise ourselves and board the boats directly. How about that? Hey, that's an idea. With Boss's disguise skills, they definitely won't be able to see through us. It's not that easy. Owens smiled bitterly and waved his hand regretfully, once again undermining everyone's confidence. I admit that Tangan's disguise skills are very good. It's almost real. Judging from the appearance alone, the people in the temple headquarters won't notice anything. But, after a pause, Owen spread his hands and said, Apart from me, who can use light magic? Who can use holy combat aura? Tangan frowned. You're saying that when they check real identities, they look at who has light magic elements or holy combat aura elements on them. Owens nodded. That's right. And not just anyone can enter the temple headquarters. In other words, the clergymen who can stay on the island freely, be it warriors or mages, have their combat aura and magic attributes recorded in the temple headquarters. After this check, there's basically no possibility of error. Hearing this, everyone was completely speechless. This was King's strict security to the teeth. It was difficult to even get close to such a strange place, let alone sneak in and cause trouble. After a while, Harry frowned. Is there no successful case? Has no outsider successfully infiltrated the temple headquarters in the past 1,000 years? Well, there should be, but I'm not sure how long ago it was. I only know that someone once killed his way into the temple headquarters last year and caused quite a stir. Oh? How'd he get in? Hearing this, everyone was suddenly excited. Previously, the North Temple headquarters had a long-distance teleportation array that could directly teleport into the temple headquarters. He used this method to get in. Then, before the temple headquarters could react, he slashed open the outer defensive shield of the temple headquarters and left. After a pause, Owens looked at the shocked crowd and spread his hands. Although the temple headquarters has no evidence, and he didn't admit it, but that person should be the god of swords, Wu Ding. Damn. Chapter 1083. F***CK. In the end, it was still nonsense. This could not be considered a successful case at all, because there was only one sword god. Owen's attitude was not so much an explanation, but a blow to everyone's confidence. And what was even more infuriating was that what he said was the truth. What the hell? So, everyone was immersed in depression, but Tang In figured out something else and frowned again. Even if we successfully sneak into the shrine headquarters, as long as we appear on the island, we will be immediately detected by the other party. That's more or less what I mean. Owens nodded helplessly. The defense of a shrine headquarters is very tight. In addition to the guards in the open, the mages all over the island will release detection magic from time to time, covering the entire island. In this case, even if you can disguise your appearance perfectly, you can't hide the difference in the attributes of the power in your body. Of course, if it's just a normal time, this kind of magic detection is not frequent, and there may be loopholes to exploit. But now, glancing at Tang In, Owens shook his head and sighed. The shrine spent 1,000 years to build an intelligence agency, and its power cannot be underestimated. Tang In, although you are extremely low-key, the shrine knows your strength evaluation and your fighting style like the back of their hand. They must have guessed that you will come to rescue Sylvia, so the intensity of the detection on the island must be the highest level. Since it was the highest level, it was equivalent to a synonym for flawless for the colossal shrine headquarters. Owens did not say this sentence, for fear of hurting the confidence of Tang In and the others, but everyone was well aware of it. This is tricky. Jack looked up and sighed. There's no space at all. No, there's still space. Tang In narrowed his eyes and looked at the simple map on the table. His eyes flashed, and suddenly he reached out and pointed at two places. Owens, you just said that there are no magic traps under the water near the two river banks? Yes. Owens did not understand, but he still explained, magic traps can't be seen with the naked eye. Once accidentally triggered, ordinary people will definitely be spared. Therefore, in order to prevent accidental injuries, the shrine did not set up any magic traps around the shore of the island or in the small area on the opposite side of the lake to prevent unsuspecting residents on the shore and low-level disciples from accidentally triggering them. Pausing for a moment, Owens looked at the map of the island and raised his eyebrows. You want to start from here? Is there any meaning? We can't even get close to the island. It's meaningful. Tang In nodded affirmatively and smiled. Previously, we were discussing how to sneak into the Divine Hall headquarters. Now we only need to think about how to cross the middle lake and come to the safe waters beside the island. From the sound of it, the difficulty has been reduced by a lot, hasn't it? Owens was stunned when he heard this, and then he couldn't help but shake his head and chuckle. He was just about to say something. Suddenly, a loud laugh came from outside the door. Haha, well said. You're indeed the professional that my grandfather always talks about. It seems that you don't need my help at all. You can handle it yourself. Tang In. Philip, you're finally here. Didn't you say you were coming at night? That's right. Who else could it be other than Philip, who was walking towards them with large strides and laughing loudly? There was still a sly smile on his face as he waved his hand and said, Tiska, don't mention it. So you were planning to come at night, so that you wouldn't be easily discovered. But, haha, who am I, Philip? It's not that easy for a few people to keep an eye on me. TSK, is that so? Then what's the meaning of your coachman outfit? Cough, cough. Don't mind these details. With the complicated situation in the capital now, Philip, who had a close relationship with the new aristocrats and the forces of the second prince, was naturally not having an easy time. Actually, it was only him, Philip. Now that the god of swords Wu Ding was not dead, and the family behind him had a prominent position in the empire, the first prince's forces could not touch him, no matter how powerful they were. Otherwise, this kid would have been in the capital's prison long ago, and would not have been able to run around in disguise like he was now, of course. The first prince was still in charge of the imperial court now, so even someone like Philip, who had a powerful background, could not avoid being monitored 24/7. This was why he had finally managed to free himself and rush over to meet Tang in a day after they had arrived in the capital. After some pleasantries, Owens, who was not familiar with Philip, took the lead and asked seriously, "Even if we know that there are no magical traps in the water around the island, there is still room for maneuver. But how do we get close?" Get close? Why do we have to get close? Isn't it better to let them bring us over directly? Philip smiled, his face full of confidence. Do you mean to say that we still want to use the churches to send people on ships? Owens frowned and shook his head. You were not here just now, so you don't know that we have already rejected this suggestion. It's not feasible. The churches must be very strict with their checks. They will not allow us to disguise ourselves as clergymen and sneak onto the ships. Who said that we have to disguise ourselves as clergymen? Philip asked in return, then looked at Owens's slightly stunned expression and chuckled. I've heard of you, Owens, one of the 12 great knight commanders of the churches. You are very familiar with the topography of the headquarters of the churches, the upper levels, and so on, but it is precisely because your level is too high that you have overlooked a small, unnoticeable detail at the bottom level. A small detail at the bottom level? Please speak. Logistics services. Philip threw out the riddle, then looked at Owens, whose body suddenly trembled, and smiled brightly. You have to know that clergymen are also humans. They need to eat, drink, and defecate. They also like to wear new clothes, and they also need to live in new houses. So the question is, where do these food, cloth, building materials, and so on come from? That island with a radius of less than 100 miles can't be self-sufficient. You mean, mix in with the church's transport ships loaded with logistic supplies? Owens's expression suddenly became excited. It's feasible. It's absolutely feasible. No matter how strong the inspections of the churches are, it's impossible to open every package of logistic supplies. Yes, this plan is absolutely feasible. By the way, which are the merchant groups designated by the churches to purchase supplies? Quickly go and check. There's no need to go through so much trouble. Philip waved his hand and interrupted, the corners of his mouth curling up. Before all supplies are shipped to the headquarters of the churches, they must first go through an organization of the empire for centralized statistics. Unfortunately, I have some connections in that organization, so it's not a problem to squeeze in a few people. This was the role of a local tyrant. Tangen took a deep breath and did not hold back. He directly asked, how many times and when does the church's ships transport supplies? Once a month. The nearest time is a week later. Just this one. Lan Sha had bought Tang in a month's time for the rescue operation. Excluding the time spent on the way here, there was only about half a month left. This way, Tangen couldn't wait another month for the church to transport supplies, so the trip a week later was his only chance. There was no other choice, so he made the decision very decisively. Mix in with the ships and approach the headquarters of the churches, go into the water before landing on the island, and sneak into the surrounding waters where there are no magic traps. Going through the infiltration plan, pause for a while, Harry quickly picked up a scroll of information and flipped through it. When he found a certain point, he immediately shouted excitedly, there are many drinking wells on the island, as well as a few ornamental ponds, all of which are running water. Haha, I knew it. I knew it would be like this. Harry waved his arms wildly, but his seemingly crazy behavior didn't frighten anyone. Luke's eyes lit up as he instantly understood. He hurriedly added, "There are still so many people living there, eating and drinking. It's impossible that there aren't underground water and sewage pipes on the island." Jack rubbed his palms like a fox that had jumped into a henhouse. He quickly continued, "So, after we sneak into the waters around the island, as long as we find the exits of these pipes, we can sneak into the headquarters of the churches." "That's right. As long as we're careful and don't appear on the surface, even those detection spells won't be able to find us. Also, if we follow these enormous underground pipes, we might be lucky enough to sneak into the Pope's bathroom and kill him with one stab." Ha! In just a short moment, the despairing and depressing atmosphere in the front hall was instantly swept away. Instead, it was replaced by an unconcealable excitement and throbbing. This was the style of an assassin. This was the charm of an assassination. It was like solving a problem, like guessing a riddle, intoxicating. Whether it was the seemingly indestructible steel fortress or the seemingly flawless security. As long as the slightest flaw, even if it was invisible to the naked eye, fell into the hands of a professional assassin, it would be a great opportunity for an assassination. It would be the key to victory that would collapse the entire situation. It was always easier to destroy than to build. Thanks. Of course, the actual situation wasn't as easy as Harry and the others thought, but that didn't affect Tang Un's good mood, nor did it stop him from thanking Philip. He waved his hand modestly. "No need. Even without me, you would definitely have thought of a way to sneak into the headquarters of the churches." Pausing for a moment, Philip suddenly changed the topic and smiled slyly. "Of course, since you've received my help now, you have to return the favor. I knew you didn't have a pure reason for calling me over this time, so you were waiting for me here." Twain smiled and didn't hesitate to wave his hand and say, "Tell me what your favor is. It's very simple." He took a slight breath and leaned close to Tang In's ear. Philip's expression suddenly became extremely fierce. "Kill that traitor." "Who? Winston?" Tang In reacted instantly and looked at Philip, who nodded with a gloomy face. He couldn't help but have a strange expression. "By the way, how long has it been since you went to see your grandfather?" "I just saw him yesterday." Why are you asking this?" Tang In was speechless and spread his hands. Philip also reacted when he saw this. He laughed and shook his head with his hand on his forehead. "Grandfather didn't tell me this. Previously, I was worried that he was old and couldn't bear to do it. So, he was waiting for you to come over and tell you. That's good. It's good that he can be ruthless." Chapter 1084. "What? You want to act alone this time?" "No. Boss, you can't do that. Since we came together this time, boss, don't think about leaving us alone again. You idiot. Do you want to be a hero by yourself again? Let me tell you, kid, don't even think about it." After finalizing the method to sneak into the temple headquarters, the tense atmosphere in the hall suddenly relaxed. But everyone knew that this was only temporary, because even if they successfully sneaked into the temple headquarters, this was only the foundation of the next rescue operation. And just as Philip, who could not stay for long, hurried over and left the manor, Tang In told them about the subsequent plan, especially when he vaguely pointed out that he would sneak into the temple headquarters alone. The atmosphere in the hall boiled again. Everyone seemed to be very indifferent when they casually accepted Tang In's plan to assassinate the Pope. In a sense, this was just a matter of strategic disdain and psychological disdain for people. In fact, everyone knew how dangerous this plan was and how slim the chances of success were. That was the King Pope, a supreme existence that ordinary believers could not see in their lifetime. And now they were discussing how to stab him to death. Well, at the end of the day, it was only because the plan could not keep up with the changes, and they had no choice but to bite the bullet and accept this mission setting with Tang In. In other words, if it were not for the fact that the one being held captive was Sylvia, Tang In's lover, and his unborn child, everyone would not have such a crazy idea, even if they had gone crazy. But that was the main point. Even so, Even if they knew that it would not bode well for them, everyone still stood on Tangen's side without hesitation. They were not willing to travel thousands of miles and rack their brains to come up with a plan, even if they had to sacrifice their own lives for it. But now, Tangen was planning to abandon them and flaunt his heroism to do it alone. How could this not make everyone angry? And they slammed the table and scolded him. Tangen, Jack, will King say this. If you dare to go alone, I'll be the first to betray you. Go to the royal court castle. Go to the temple headquarters. I'll post posters all over the streets and report you. You idiot bastard. That's right, count me in. Boss, don't glare at me. You're the one who started this. Okay, Jack, calm down. Harry, you should stop talking. Why are you threatening me? Hey, Tangen, it's not that Owens, am threatening you. You know, although I betrayed the temple, I still have some connections there. Do you believe that as soon as you leave, I will be able to send your plan of action to the Pope? He smiled bitterly and continued to smile bitterly, looking at the indignant crowd. What other expression could Tangen make other than a bitter smile? Perhaps it was inevitable, but it was internal. For example, his heart was overflowing with emotions. All right, let me finish. Tangen pressed his palms and slightly calmed them down. He opened his hands innocently and said, I only said that I would go to the headquarters of the Divine Temple alone. I didn't say that the assassination of the Pope was my own business. Why are you so agitated? Is there a difference in this statement? Jack was stunned and took the lead to ask, You're going to the headquarters of the Divine Temple alone. Aren't you going to assassinate the Pope alone? That's because you have a problem with your understanding. Tangen rolled his eyes in annoyance. Assassination is a craft. The more people there are, the more trouble there is. Have you seen a few artists with different styles painting a picture together? By the same token, how many assassins have you ever seen working together? He raised his finger and pointed at himself. So, the assassination of the Pope can only be done by me alone. Don't be agitated. It's not that I want to be a hero. Damn, this sentence is disgusting. Who wants to be a hero? Anyway, I don't want to be painted as a portrait and pasted on the wall, or erected as a statue and thrown in the corner for future generations to mourn. I'm going to kill the Pope alone because the success rate is the highest. That's all, understand? This was the truth, but it was not enough to calm everyone's emotions. But boss, I said, let me finish. Raising his hand to interrupt, Tangen smiled and continued. You still don't understand what I mean. Assassinating the Pope is not a small task. Frankly speaking, I'm not confident. Even if I'm lucky enough to succeed, I'm even less confident that I can come out of the headquarters of the Divine Temple alive. So, I need your help. I'll be the one to assassinate the Pope. But you have to help me with the preparations before and after, as well as the cleanup. After a pause, he looked around at everyone who suddenly understood. If I put it this way, do you understand? Phew. Boss, you should have said so earlier. Yeah, we thought you'd be like before, abandoning everyone and doing it alone. That's right. Boss, we'll do whatever you say. You have a specific plan? After listening to Tangen's explanation, the atmosphere in the hall suddenly relaxed again. That was the logic. Assassination was indeed a craft, but it was also a lonely art. In this field, there was basically no situation where 1 + 1 = 2 or is greater than 2. Even the most well-coordinated team would not be able to do so. Of course, this was not to deny the role of the team's helpers. If that was the case, Tangen would not have single-handedly created an assassination team like the Gray Space. The key point was not the number of people, but the correct way to use it. Assassination was never simple, even if it was just to assassinate a gangster. Generally speaking, outsiders only saw the breathtaking final cut of the throat, but they did not know the various costs that the assassin had to pay before and the many boring jobs that had to be done. The advantage of having more people was reflected in this. One assassin and one knife were enough to assassinate the target. But during the preparation period, naturally, the more people there were, the better. Seeing that everyone suddenly understood, there were no more objections. Tangen nodded with satisfaction and waved his hand to gather everyone. The specific plan is not out yet, but I have a rough idea. Everyone, come and listen to it. Well, let's temporarily shift the camera away from this group of professional dark people and go somewhere else to find some beautiful things to purify our souls. Then we'll use the fast-forward editing method to infinitely magnify these beautiful things. Well, the above was indeed in the water. But it was not the raccoons' fault, because they were a group of vulgar people who were used to jumping around to watch the scenes without seeing the scenes of the protagonists. Ha! In the north, the mountain road was rugged like a dragon. Hundreds of thousands of barbarian warriors advanced in silence. Their breaths were like the wind, and their majesty was like a mountain in the middle of the army. You shouldn't be here. You should be very busy now. Or, I thought that you should be hiding in some unknown corner, secretly wiping your tears, cursing and scolding someone. Ha! Looking at the uninvited guest in front of him, a young and beautiful woman in a white robe, Lan Shah raised his eyebrows and habitually put on a mocking smile. Compared to me, in your position, you should be the one who should be cursing and crying the most, right? Huh, I haven't seen you for half a month, but you're still as annoying as before. Same to you. Shrugging, the young woman looked away disapprovingly and directly at the beautiful woman who looked very similar to Lan Shah, but had a more graceful and dignified temperament. She bowed and saluted. Greetings, Your Majesty. I'm Josiah, the leader of the Gray Coat Army. Sorry, I didn't inform you beforehand. You don't mind if I go with you, right? You know me? The Empress looked at him with interest. No, but I've heard of you. Oh, that's interesting. The Empress's smile grew wider. Can you find a reason to stop me from wanting to kill you now and take the opportunity to lead the army to occupy the north? As soon as she finished speaking, it seemed like a casual joke, but the atmosphere instantly froze. Fry, David, and the others who came with Josiah subconsciously touched the hilts of their swords at their waists and looked nervously at the Northern Wilderness Empress, who was smiling faintly. Further outside, countless barbarian soldiers revealed cruel smiles and approached covetously. Seeing this, Lan Shah frowned slightly and opened his mouth to say something. Are you sure you want me to say this reason, Your Majesty? Josiah looked indifferent and fixed his gaze on the Empress, who was also expressionless. He paused and spread out his hands. Because you don't dare. How dare you? How dare you? Hypocritical brand people, you're looking for death. If the Empress's words froze the atmosphere, then Josiah's words instantly made the atmosphere boil like boiling oil. The eyes of the tribal warriors at the side instantly turned blood red. They roared and were about to raise the huge iron rod in their hands and smash the brand people in front of them who dared to offend the Empress's dignity into meat paste. But in the blink of an eye, as the Empress pressed her palms slightly, the tribal warriors who were as ferocious as beasts instantly shut up and retreated, returning to silence. What a big tone. Is it that brat called Tang? And who gave you the confidence? The Empress was not angry. On the contrary, she looked at the silent Josiah with some curiosity and appreciation. Then she shook her head regretfully. Just now you said that you've heard of me. In fact, I've also heard of you and your deeds. Well, you're very outstanding, just like my daughter. But it's a pity that such an outstanding woman is now sad and unwilling because of a playboy. Even after being hurt, she doesn't want to take revenge. Instead, she continues to worry about that playboy. Ha! It's really puzzling. She said it was puzzling, but in her laughter, there was undisguised contempt. It was like a sharp knife that easily cut open a bloody wound. Josiah was silent for a moment. After a while, he slightly curled the corner of his mouth and said, Maybe you should get the answer from your equally outstanding daughter. Lan Shah, who was instantly implicated, breathed heavily. He wanted to open his mouth to refute, but in the end, he didn't say anything. He just snorted softly and was very dissatisfied. What sharp tongue? Slightly stunned, the Empress couldn't help but laugh. She looked away and ended the conversation. Then pray that the brat won't die in the temple. Otherwise, I won't be polite to you and the Gray Coat Army. He won't die. Without any pause, Josiah directly shook his head and said without thinking, "He will never die, and you will never find the opportunity to be rude." Huh, there's no point in arguing. Let's just wait and see. Chapter 1085. One day, another day, another day, the camera turned again and continued to speed up the pace. In the south, somewhere in a city, smoke was rising. Reporting, "Your Highness, Bayun City in the east has been breached. The Thunderbolts Army's 1st Army Big Sword Camp, 3rd Division Long Spear Camp, and the Legion's Heavy Cavalry Brigade, a total of tens of thousands of bandits, are heading this way. They're expected to arrive at the city gate tomorrow morning. Your Highness, there is an urgent message from Chusai City in the north. General Clay can't hold on any longer. They urgently need reinforcements. The same goes for Bailey City in the west. The attacking Zechen Legion is too powerful. It is estimated that they can only hold on for one more day at most. The general sent someone back. They will live and die with the city. Your Highness, in the moderately sized hall, the tense atmosphere was spreading in panic. The moderately sized threshold seemed to be about to collapse from the messengers who were returning one after another. Negative battle reports came one after another, like shackles and reins that were constantly tightening, making everyone in the hall unable to breathe and pale when they heard it. Haha, we're really being attacked from all sides. How clumsy. In the panicked atmosphere, only the gentle young man who was surrounded by everyone remained calm. He laughed at himself and was calm. Your Highness, this place is dangerous. You can't stay any longer. You have to retreat now. Retreat? Where else can I retreat to? The gentle young man raised his eyebrows. Since we stepped into the south, we have taken over dozens of cities. Excluding the small towns that have no strategic defense value, there are only 7 big cities that can be used. Counting the cities that have been breached and are about to be breached, only Manta City under our feet can fight. You want me to retreat at this time? Isn't that asking me to raise my hands and surrender? But the bandits are about to kill us. Your Highness, you have a noble status. You can't take the risk. That's right, Your Highness. Why don't you retreat to the small cities at the back with the other knights and contact the reinforcements? We will continue to guard here and fight to the death. We will never let the bandits take a step forward. This is a good idea. As long as Your Highness is safe, we can keep the hope of continuing to resist. Gamias. In the chaos of dissuasion, the second prince of the Imperium, who had always presented himself as a gentleman, suddenly cursed. Frowning, he looked at the stunned old nobles around him and said solemnly, "As the commander, you fled without fighting and asked your subordinates to block the enemy with their bodies. Even if I can survive, how can I face others in the future? There's no need to say more. You won't understand." Pausing for a moment, the second prince simply raised his hand to interrupt the people who were still unwilling to give up. Slowly but firmly, he drew out the sword at his waist and said solemnly, "Pass down my order. Let Clay and the other generals abandon the ruined city and lead their soldiers back here immediately. They will defend the walls of Manta with me to the death." Your Highness, shut up. I've already told you that you don't understand. Carry out military orders. Yes. Looking at the excited officer who performed the standard military salute and left in a hurry after receiving the order, then turning his head to look at the worried old nobles, the second prince shook his head and strode out of the meeting hall with his sword. Surrounded by the guards in front of him, he resolutely walked toward the city wall. You don't understand. The key to determining the outcome of this battle, and even the ownership of the imperial power of the empire, was not the victory or loss of this battle at all. Far away, in the palace of the capital, in the headquarters of the Temple of Light, in the hands of someone. So, all they needed to do was to hold on. The longer the better. The so-called smart people were the kind of people who could see what ordinary people could not see and think of things that ordinary people could not think of. Therefore, even if they were surrounded by enemies from all sides and the situation was precarious, the second prince still did not panic. Of course, then again, the side of the first prince who had the absolute advantage naturally did not panic. On the contrary, they were in a very good mood as they watched over the capital, because in their view, everything was already under their control. Therefore, even if the outcome was not out yet, they had already begun to think about what would happen next and began to enjoy the sweet fruits of victory in advance. For example, before the first prince put on the crown, they would first hold a small celebration in the capital. Well, it must be said that this was not purely to show off their victory or to act arrogantly, but it was in accordance with the rules of the royal family. As mentioned earlier, the Bran Empire was a closely integrated kingdom of royal and divine authority. If the new king wanted to truly ascend the throne, he had to personally go to the headquarters of the Temple of Light, receive the blessing of the Pope, and wear the crown. Only then could he be legitimately crowned king. Now, the ambitious first prince of the empire was going through this process. To put it bluntly, he would first hold a small celebration in his own home, then go to the headquarters of the Temple of Light to receive the crown, and finally return, hold a national celebration and amnesty. Well, that was the general process. Therefore, a few days later, in the evening, outside the royal theater of the capital, it was the end of winter, and under the cover of the heavy snow, which was believed to be the last snow of the year, the majestic theater decorated with lanterns and streamers did not feel cold at all. Bonfires were burning, people and carriages were coming and going, exchanging greetings, softly neighing of horses, and the crisp sound of wheels rolling over the snow. Cheerful music could be faintly heard from outside the theater, even without entering the theater. It was extraordinarily lively, and the atmosphere was excellent. What a scene of singing and dancing. Oh, if it isn't Count Hubert. Good evening. I heard that your family has been expanding rapidly recently and has taken over several merchant group shops. Even the goods sent to the headquarters of the Temple of Light tonight, your family participated. Haha, in that case, you should leave some soup for us small families to drink. Marquis Primo? Haha. Sir, you're exaggerating. If you're a small family, then are we not worth mentioning? Ah, Hubert, don't try to fool me with words. In front of you, who is on good terms with His Highness the First Prince, isn't our family not worth mentioning? Sir, you're too modest. Moreover, there's no such thing as His Highness the First Prince now. Oh, look at my broken mouth. I just can't learn how to speak. It's His Majesty the King, His Majesty the King. Please. I wouldn't dare, sir, please. Then please. In the snow in front of the theater, two old nobles wearing velvet pointy hats and luxurious cloaks waved at each other, then looked at each other and laughed loudly, holding each other's hands as they walked toward the theater together. Similar scenes and dialogues were common in front of the theater. To put it bluntly, it was bustling with activity, all for the sake of profit. After the first prince had personally poisoned the old king to death and pursued his younger brother, the second prince, the various forces in the capital that were previously clearly divided naturally disintegrated and were reshuffled. Among them, forces like Count Hubert, who were close to the first prince, took advantage of the situation like wild beasts, swarming forward and tearing apart the fruits of victory that originally belonged to the second prince's forces. As for nobles like Marquis Primo, who had originally maintained a neutral stance after seeing that the outcome of the battle had been decided, they naturally went with the flow and followed the first prince's forces, hoping to reap some additional benefits for their families. Things like that were nothing more than flies trying to seek personal gain, so it was not surprising. However, just as the two old nobles were about to enter the theater, the sound of hurried horses suddenly came from the intersection behind them, mixed with the faint sound of clashing weapons and armor. They could not help but turn around in surprise. As mentioned earlier, this was a banquet held by the first prince to celebrate his coronation. With the current situation in the capital being one-sided, there should not be a tense atmosphere where a large group of cavalry guards with unsheathed swords galloped through the wind and snow. It was clearly out of place. However, when everyone saw the family insignia on the luxurious carriage being guarded behind the large group of cavalry, they could not help but come to a realization. So, It's the Ogler family. Ha, no wonder. Shameless scoundrel, reaping what he sowed. That's right, I still remember when that brat Winston first became the sword god's disciple, causing a sensation in the capital, bringing the Ogler family along with him. He was so arrogant. But now? Come to think of it, everyone must have heard. Just 2 days ago, a group of assassins took advantage of the night to break into the Ogler family's manor, wantonly slaughtering and causing quite a commotion. I heard that this group of people should have gone to kill that scoundrel Winston, cleaning up the family for the sword god. Unfortunately, they did not succeed. Not to mention Winston's character, just his strength and talent are not bad. After all, he comes from the sword god's lineage. No matter how good he is, he will not be able to escape death. I think this Winston is in the capital. As long as he dares to take a step out of the city, he will definitely be surrounded and killed by the experts who have heard the news. That's right. I heard that the royal family in the castle is also very dissatisfied with him. If it were not for the first prince suppressing him, this Winston and the Ogler family would have been destroyed many times over. The group of nobles who had temporarily stopped outside the theater looked at the cavalry formation and luxurious carriage that slowly came to a stop. Some looked at them with disdain, some took pleasure in their misfortune. Their expressions of mockery were not one of many, and they did not hide it in the slightest. It was not strange for such a disharmonious scene to appear. There were no secrets in the circle of nobles. Regarding the matter of Winston tricking his senior brother Haida to leave the Empire Sanatorium and then setting up an ambush to kill him, although the first prince tried his best to cover it up, there were still faint rumors in the upper circle of nobles in the capital. The sword god Wu Ding's position in the Bran Empire was very high. He had protected the empire for most of his life, and his great achievements had even surpassed the boundaries of the imperial faction. No matter if it was the first prince's side that had gained power or the second prince's side that had lost power, there was no difference in their respect for this guardian god. As such, the people now had a bad impression of Winston and his family, who had betrayed his teacher and assassinated his senior brother. Even if the other party was now considered one of their own who had abandoned the dark for the light. Oh, he actually brought a gun. Is he going to bring a weapon to the banquet? Squinting at the figure walking down from the luxurious carriage in the distance, the old noble in front of the theater could not help but shake his head and laugh, the corners of his mouth slightly mocking. Not only did he bring a gun, he was also injured. Looks like this kid has not been having an easy time recently. Forget it, today is a day of celebration. Don't worry about him. Come, let's go in first. Please. Chapter 1086. Could it be that I really did something wrong? In the snow outside the theater, Winston, who got down from the carriage, did not immediately walk to the entrance of the theater to attend the banquet. Instead, he leaned against the side of the carriage like a spear beside him, quietly standing in the fluttering snowflakes. He crossed his arms and gently touched his bandaged left arm. His face was gloomy and dispirited, and his expression was absent-minded. Regardless of whether he was willing or not, as a void-level warrior, his sharp hearing could clearly hear the discussions in the distance, including the undisguised ridicule and resentment. To be honest, Winston did not really care about this. When he betrayed his master and personally sent the spear into the back of the sea tower, he had already expected and prepared for this situation. It was ridiculous. What did they know? Who knew better than him, the former disciple of the sword god, about the far-reaching influence of the sword god's bloodline in the empire? It was not an exaggeration to say that as long as the sword god was well, then no matter who ascended the throne, they would not be able to ignore the sword god's opinion. They would have to get the approval of the sword god first. It was also because of this that the moment the sword god fell, the effects of the backlash in all aspects followed one after another. The sword god was going to die, and the sword god bloodline was also going to be finished. Just like the tree was going to fall, and the mountain was going to collapse. At this time, who would care about the life and death of the birds on the tree and the beasts on the mountain? Not to mention other things, just the enemies of the sword god's bloodline, the huge pressure from the Temple of Light. Who could withstand it? In this way, I will choose a new strong backer for the family to protect the family's glory and continue to pass on. Just like what most of you are doing now, hitting the second prince when he is down, surrendering to the first prince. Did I do anything wrong? No, I did not do anything wrong. Never, never. He clenched his fists, and the snowflakes that fell on his shoulders immediately rustled down. Winston exhaled a long breath of hot air, like a beast that had fallen into a trap, his eyes fierce. Immediately, he raised his hand into his bosom, took out a small brown square box, opened it, took out an exquisite cigarette, and lit it. Smoke rose in spirals. Probably because he did not smoke often, his action of lighting the cigarette was a little clumsy, and he also coughed a little. Winston's eyes were slightly red, and the expression on his face behind the smoke was even more absent-minded. Since I did nothing wrong, why do you have to hold on to me and not let me go? Why is even the clan members like this? Yes, when Scylla could ignore the opinions of outsiders, but he could not let go of the distant attitude of the people around him. He believed that no matter who it was, they would not be able to take it to heart. All of his actions were clearly for the sake of his family's honor. Previously, it was because of the support and encouragement of all the elders in the clan that he betrayed the sect and killed his senior brother. Even the wound on his left arm was caused by the fierce battle with the bandits who broke into the manor in the middle of the night in order to save the people of the clan 2 days ago. He had already done everything he could and given everything, including his reputation. So why are they looking at me like I'm a man-eating monster? They're not even willing to look at me. Why? Both inside and outside were inhumane. Ha! Why? Young master. Just as Winston's body was trembling slightly due to his confusion and resentment, and he was gasping for breath, a guard cowered and approached. Master has already led the clansmen in first. He asked me to tell you that the theater's guards have already been informed. Later, you can bring your gun in through the side door. Also, don't mind what others say. It will all pass. After he finished speaking, Winston waved his hand impatiently. The clan guard immediately bowed and retreated as if he had been pardoned. Look, they're not even willing to go in with me. The corner of Winston's mouth twitched slightly. He chuckled self-deprecatingly and shook his head in confusion. Under the sky, full of snowflakes, Winston, who was leaning against the shadow of the carriage by the side of the road, formed a stark contrast with the cheerful laughter of the theater's main entrance not far away. Between the light and darkness, one was cold and cheerless, the other was lively. It was as if they were two completely different worlds. A moment later, half of the cigarette fell into the snow. The green smoke was faint. After sacrificing its own source of fire, the burning end of the cigarette also melted a small snowflake. Immediately, Winston reached out and grabbed the ice-cold spear beside him. As he shook off the snowflakes on his body, he tidied up his expression and strode towards the theater's side, door expressionlessly. In the meantime, of course, he would run into acquaintances of the nobles who came to attend the banquet. But Winston looked straight ahead and walked straight, as if he did not see them. He had no intention of greeting them at all. Of course, no one would come forward to greet him. There were only strange gazes and expressions after hurriedly retreating and dodging. It was as if they were looking at a god of plague that had suddenly descended into the mortal world. However, there were exceptions. Just as Winston was about to step onto the side door stairs, an ear-piercing voice suddenly came from the side. Yo, isn't this Winston? Long time no see. You still have a face to come out now? After the seemingly familiar greeting, there was a sharp turn of bitter ridicule. It caused Winston's face to darken, and he stopped at the bottom of the stairs. It also caused the nobles at the side to look at him in shock or astonishment. Just like what a noble had said earlier, Winston was, after all, from the bloodline of the sword god. His talent was outstanding, and there was no doubt about his strength. Therefore, although the people present despised his character, they were afraid of his strength. Some unpleasant words did not dare to be said openly, at least not to his face. And now, this ear-piercing voice had undoubtedly directly released these words that they did not dare to say. It was completely as if they had shed all pretense of cordiality. Naturally, the hearts of the onlookers tightened. They were afraid that Winston would suddenly go crazy and bring disaster to them, causing trouble for the celebration. However, when the crowd heard the voice and turned to the owner of the ear-piercing voice, their expressions could not help but be stunned, enlightened, and then relaxed. So was him? It was not strange. It was indeed not strange. Looking at Philip, who did not hide his mocking expression on the stairs, Winston's face twitched. He subconsciously looked away, lowered his head, and stepped forward, intending to go around. From the beginning to the end, Winston did not feel that he had done anything wrong, nor did he feel that anyone had the right to laugh at him. However, this obviously did not include the bloodline of the sword god that he had deeply hurt in Philip's family. What? Philip stepped to the side at the same time and blocked in front of Winston again. He mocked in a cold voice. You, Winston, have the guts to betray your sect, but you don't have the guts to talk to me. Get out of the way. Winston finally could not hold it in and growled in a deep voice. Today is the coronation of the first prince. I don't want to have a conflict with you. Wow, are you going to attack me? All right, come on. Philip exaggeratedly leaned back and spread his hands, not reducing his mockery. Anyway, you even dare to kill your senior brother, Haida. So what am I to you? Don't you think so? Come on. Use the divine weapon long spear that your grandfather went all over the place to collect materials to forge for you. Kill me. Suddenly, with a fierce and violent roar, Winston's body suddenly trembled slightly. His hand tightly gripped the body of the spear, making creaking sounds. The surroundings instantly fell silent. What are you afraid of? Winston, raise your head and look at me. Roaring, Philip, who had suddenly walked down the stone steps and stood in front of Owens. He was like a ferocious demon beast with an expression that wanted to devour people. You King, raise your head and look at me. Look at senior brother Haida, who was killed by you. Look at your master, the sword god, who was extremely disappointed in you. Taking a step back, he subconsciously raised his head when he heard the voice. He met the eyes that were spitting fire that even the endless wind and snow could not hide. Once again, he subconsciously looked away. Immediately, he saw the disdainful gazes and expressions of contempt from the people around him, as well as his father, who was standing behind the crowd and waving at him with a sullen face. Obviously, no one wanted to see a conflict here, especially when they saw Winston, who had betrayed his sect, and Philip, who had come to find him, come to conflict. This included Winston's father and clansmen. Therefore, Winston could only turn around in humiliation and leave alone before he stepped into the theater to participate in the celebration. It had to be said that this scene was really ironic. It must be known that the celebration was an occasion for the first prince's forces to share the fruits of victory, and Philip had never belonged to the first prince's side. He had always been closer to the second prince. However, Winston, who had to bear all kinds of infamy in order to hand over the proof of his allegiance, had successfully joined the first prince's side. Now, he had no chance to participate in the victory celebration. Even the first prince's forces around him did not stand up to speak for him. On the contrary, they all looked as if they wanted him to leave as soon as possible, deserted by everyone. Coward! Bastard! Bastard! Although Winston left dejectedly, Philip, who was behind him, clearly did not intend to let him go so easily. He glared at Winston's back, and his curses echoed in the wind and snow in front of the theater. Do you think that if you avoid me, this matter will end? You will die. Winston, I guarantee that you will definitely die. Young master. Amidst the shrill curses, the family coachman saw Winston, who was walking over with a gloomy face. He hurriedly went up and stuttered to ask, afraid that he would anger him. Go where? Go back. With a bang, Winston naturally would not argue with the coachman. He took a few quick steps and squeezed into the family carriage in a slightly sorry state. He swung his hand and slammed the door. This lunatic. Run? You dare to run. Bastard, even if you hide in the northern wilderness, Philip, will send people to hunt you down. You're dead meat. Ahem, Sir Philip, calm down, calm down. He has already left. He can't hear you. After all, it was a celebration, and cursing here was naturally inappropriate. So when he saw Winston's carriage turn the corner and quickly disappear, an old noble hurriedly went up to hold the furious Philip back and kept comforting him with words. However, calm down. Am I angry? Philip, who had been pointing at the heavens and cursing the earth a moment ago, suddenly quieted down strangely at this moment. He looked at the stunned old noble with a baffled expression and straightened his clothes. What kind of joke is this? I am a noble with grace. Why would I get angry for no reason? I don't understand what you are saying. Right? I am going in to attend the banquet. Are you coming in? If not, I will leave first. The nobles present could not help but be speechless when they heard this. This F** king speed of turning hostile was simply F** king amazing. And you, the flower wolf of the imperial city, have grace? All right, this was the biggest joke of the day. However, what the stunned and speechless nobles did not notice was that when Philip stepped into the side door of the theater, he turned his head slightly and narrowed his eyes to look at the snowy intersection where Owens's carriage had disappeared. The corners of his mouth curled up, and he revealed a strange smile. Did you really think I was joking, that I was just shooting my mouth off? Ha! If I say you will die, you will die. Chapter 1087. Things like snowflakes could often evoke romantic associations in people. This was not the meaning attached to snowflakes. In fact, snowflakes were just an advanced version of rain. After melting, they would reveal their true colors. The same applied to hail. The only difference was that the evolved version was more advanced. So, who would think that hail was romantic? Other than a few masochists, no one would think that this thing that hurt people had any romantic meaning. However, it was precisely the snowflakes that had a strong romantic value in the various YY scenarios that humans had added and imposed upon them. Well, this could not be considered an illusion. After all, watching white feather-like objects dancing in the air and slowly drifting away like willow catkins, finally dyeing the world pure and flawless, was indeed quite a feeling and quite pleasing to the eye, of course. This was under the premise that one could watch it through a glass. Achoo! What kind of weather is this? Phew! I'm freezing to death. At night, in the corner of a street in the capital, under a shop sign, Bugnes, who was said to be patrolling, was actually no different from a homeless person on the streets. He shivered and sneezed. He rubbed his nose and looked bitterly at the snowflakes outside the shop sign. He smacked his lips and complained, "Old Bow, why do you think the two of us left the north and came to the capital? Anyway, we have long given up on being promoted and rich. At that time, we took advantage of the chaos to escape and found a small town in the north to live a good life. Why do we have to board the ship and come here to suffer? Achoo, you see patrol day and night. There's not even a ghost on the streets. I can't even sleep well. What the F***CK? Am I sick? Say something, Old Bow. What are you trying to say? You asked so many questions in one breath. I have to think about which one to answer first. Bugnes. Bose pinched the space between his eyebrows and then rubbed his big red nose. He also looked helpless and irritated. When we were about to board the ship and return to the south, I discussed it with you. Didn't you analyze that the Gray Coat Army wasn't reliable and that we had offended them before, and that staying in the north would only bode ill for us? That's why we agreed to return to the south. What's the point of saying all this now? Pausing for a moment, he continued. As for the reason why there are no ghosts on the streets, it's because the Royal Theatre in the city is holding a grand celebration before the first prince's coronation. All the nobles in the capital are attending. They're afraid of ghosts, so there's a curfew tonight. Also, go find a bowl of hot soup, or you'll really fall sick. As soon as he finished speaking, there was a popping sound. Bose frowned as he looked at the Bugnes. He reached into the bag beside the horse and took out a wine flask. He pulled out the cork and took a big gulp. I'm talking about hot soup. I know, but Bugnes raised the wine pot and wiped the remaining wine stain on the corner of his mouth. Is there any hot soup better than spicy wine? All right, you're the one who asked for it. You can't blame me. Bo shrugged speechlessly. He shook off the snow on his body and then waved his hand at the dragon riders behind him. Let's go, let's go. All of you, go out and continue patrolling. Don't, Captain. Let's rest a bit more. If we go out now, we'll really freeze to death. Yeah, at least wait until the snow lessens a bit. There aren't many people on the streets anyway. There's no difference whether we patrol or not. Captain, shut up. What do you brats know? If you continue to stay here, you'll really freeze to death. Hurry up and drink some wine. Go out and move a bit. You'll warm up after moving a bit. Amidst the sounds of wailing, Bose kicked the horsemen back into the snow with great difficulty. Then, without waiting for them to get back on their horses, Bugnes suddenly frowned and raised his hand. Quiet. Achoo! When the sneeze fell, the sound of horse hooves could be heard from the silent street. Everyone subconsciously turned their heads towards the crossroads in the distance. A moment later, they saw a luxurious carriage drive out from the wind and snow, disappearing in a flash. It passed through the intersection and turned into a wide alley. It's a noble family. Even though that carriage disappeared from the street in a flash, it was still enough for everyone here to clearly see the carriage's luxurious exterior. Without a doubt, a carriage of this standard could only come from a noble family. It was to the extent where those with good eyesight like Bose could clearly see the family insignia engraved on the carriage's exterior. He scratched his head and said, "It's that something. Damn it, there are so many noble families in the capital city. The Ogler family," Bugnes calmly added on from his side. "That's the noble family that produced the sword god's last disciple." Apart from Bose and Bugnes, who suddenly appeared out of nowhere, the other dragon riders had already stayed in the capital city for many years. Some of them were even natives of the capital city, so their sources of information were naturally more detailed than the other two. That's strange. Isn't the Royal Theater over there? Why is this carriage going back? Could it be that the celebration ended so quickly? After a pause, Bose looked towards the dragon rider who had just replied and casually asked, "Do you know where this something family's address is?" I only know that it's roughly in the Eastern Noble District, but I don't know the exact address." This was also natural. Regardless of which city it was, the area where the noble's manor was located would always be heavily guarded, preventing unauthorized personnel from entering or leaving. Meanwhile, with the level of these dragon rider guards, they were naturally included in the scope of unauthorized personnel. Eastern District? When Bose heard this, he stared blankly. His single eye looked towards the entrance of the alley that vaguely leaned towards the southeast, and his brows furrowed slightly. Of course, this couldn't be considered a suspicion. After all, as newcomers, they couldn't be sure if this alley was a shortcut to the Eastern Noble District. All right, continue patrolling. Bugnes waved his hand disapprovingly and stepped onto his horse's back. Who knows what these nobles are doing? Who knows? They might have noticed that the clothes they wore for the celebration clashed with someone else's and are afraid of losing face, so they're rushing back to change. All right, it had to be said that with how Noble's reputation was more important than their lives, Bugnes' casual words might really be the truth. As such, Bo shrugged and didn't think too much about it. He led the Dragon Rider guards to continue patrolling along the street. Meanwhile, within the luxurious carriage that had just flashed past, "Pung, pung, pung, lunatic, lunatic, this damned lunatic. Why are you treating me like this? Why are you all treating me like this?" Ah! He suppressed his roar and frantically gasped for breath. At this moment, Winston, who sat paralyzed in the extremely messy carriage, was like a beast on the verge of death trapped in a cage. He howled with unwillingness and struggled desperately. The extraordinary humiliation in front of the theater, everyone's undisguised mockery and contempt, as well as his family's great father's passive retreat. It had to be said that no matter how much mental preparation Winston had made, he was still just a young man who was easily agitated in the end. Meanwhile, the scenes that happened in front of the theater had undoubtedly crushed his young and fragile sensitive nerves to a great extent. Anger, unwillingness, resentment. as well as whether he admitted it or not, whether he was willing or not, the anger toward his own actions that stubbornly resided at the bottom of his heart. Correct. No matter how Winston evaluated his own actions, no matter how much he didn't care or even looked down on the mockery of others, there was one thing that couldn't be changed. But there was one fact that could never be changed, and that was that he had indeed betrayed the sect that had brought him great glory, and he had indeed ambushed and killed the respectable senior brother who had treated him extremely well. That was why even if Winston could deal with the criticism and curses that filled the air with a cold expression, as long as he faced Philip and those related to the Sword God bloodline, he would naturally have a guilty conscience and be in a weak position. He couldn't get past the barrier in his heart. This was the greatest source of shame and humiliation for him. Perhaps only when Wu Ding died of old age, when everyone gradually forgot about this story, when the people of the O'Glare family began to enjoy the tangible benefits that came from relying on the First Prince's side, and then when they slowly began to recognize Winston's role and status, would he be able to obtain a certain degree of relief. Just like the words that Winston's father had sent the family guard to bring to him. Don't mind what others say, it will all pass. However, the question now was, could Winston wait until then? Nay, nay, nay. Following the low neighs of the horses outside the carriage clearly slowed down. Winston, who was sitting in the middle of the carriage while grabbing his hair, subconsciously raised his head when he heard the noise. How long had it been? Could it be that the carriage had already returned to the outside of the family? Obviously not, because it was pitch black outside the curtains of the carriage. Frowning, with a bang, Winston raised his foot and kicked the front wall of the carriage where the coachman was. He roared angrily, "What are you doing?" Sending the young master home. Of course, there was a faint, soft sigh. Winston couldn't hear it clearly. He frowned again. Whoosh. He raised his hand and pulled open the curtains. He was stunned. Outside the glass window, there was a dark, bare wall of the alley. "Go on your way, young Master Winston. It's time to send you back to your hometown." It was still a soft sigh, but the difference was that Winston heard it clearly this time, and it sounded very familiar. His body instantly froze, and his pupils contracted rapidly. An ice-cold chill shot up from his tailbone to his brain, and it exploded in his body, tang in. Chapter 1088. On a certain street in the capital, in the middle of two patrol areas. "Yo, isn't this the brothers from the second hall? And Captain Bowes, Captain Bugnes. You've worked hard. Everyone has worked hard. Captain Toby, hey, we're all working for the higher-ups. What's there to talk about?" "Achoo. Captain Toby, come, have a sip. Authentic rum." "Haha. Then I won't hold back. It's just nice to warm up my body." Under the snowstorm, two patrol teams that belonged to the capital's police department unexpectedly met on a certain street. The lively greetings instantly broke the silence. Although Bowes and Bugnes were quite famous outside, this was the capital of the empire, under the foot of the imperial court. Plus, they came from nowhere and had no foundation. Therefore, they naturally had to pay more attention to their interpersonal relationships and couldn't be as casual as before. Of course, strictly speaking, the problem wasn't that serious. When in Rome, do as the Romans do. This was the capital where nobles walked everywhere, and the retainers of the emperor were as numerous as dogs. The role of the police department was not as important as that of other cities. On the contrary, they were very low-key and used mediating methods to keep a low profile. To put it bluntly, everyone was just struggling to make a living. There weren't many complicated issues that they looked up to or looked down on. Moreover, Bowes and Bugnes were able to move through many cities in the northern and southern parts of the empire and make a name for themselves. Naturally, they weren't hotheads who didn't know anything. In fact, putting aside the tough Bowes, Bugnes, who was extremely low-key, was extremely meticulous and shrewd. He was good at communicating with people. Therefore, one side intended to express goodwill, the other side gladly accepted. In the end, everyone was happy and unusually harmonious. Now, they were all calling each other Big Brother. Come, Have another sip. Brother Toby, is there any movement on your side? Yes, there are a few old cats called Spring. Damn it, you just came and don't know. Ever since that thing is about to ascend the throne, we brothers haven't stopped. It's snowing heavily at night. There's not even a shadow on the street. What's the point of patrolling? A cough cough. Brother, be careful with your words. Be careful with your words. TSK. Good alcohol tolerance. It was a pity that there wasn't enough wine. It wasn't satisfying enough. How about this, Bose, Bugneys, you guys give me some face after the shift. I'll treat you guys. Let's find a place to have a good drink. How about that? That's good, but we still have patrol duty in the morning. There's a morning shift? F*CK. Isn't this clearly showing that you're new here and putting you in your place? Don't worry, Big Brother will help you talk to them when we get back. Thank you, but there's no need to trouble Big Brother. Recently, the hall is indeed a little short on manpower. We'll just have to do more missions. It's all right, sigh you guys. Don't blame Big Brother for scolding you. You're too kind. Others will think that you're easy to bully. Good intentions? Cough, cough. Let's drink, let's drink. All right, this was the first time they had heard such a positive evaluation. Even though Bose and Bugneys had seen a lot and lost all their moral integrity, after looking at each other with strange expressions, they couldn't help but feel their faces burn as they coughed incessantly. They had good intentions? Don't joke around. If this evaluation was heard by the countless assassins who had died by their hands, they would probably climb up in the depths of hell and tell this obviously drunk cavalry captain about the glorious deeds of Bose and Bugneys and their pure evil hearts. After a while, both of them had patrol duty, and it was still far from time to change shifts. After drinking the few bottles of wine that Bugneys had used to treat as cold, it was time for them to go their separate ways and continue patrolling. Yo, Big Brother, slow down, slow down. You guys hold on a little. Relax, relax. It's fine. It's just a little bit of wine. You won't get drunk. Even though he said that, when he looked at the captain, who was now Toby, wobbling on the horse and waving his hands, he didn't seem to be convincing at all. On the other hand, the squad members who were patrolling with the captain seemed to have known about his alcohol tolerance and weren't surprised by this scene. With a calm face, they nonchalantly bowed to Bose and Bugneys and said that it was fine. Since the other party had said so, Bose and Bugneys naturally couldn't say anything else and waved goodbye as well. At this moment, Bose suddenly thought of something and asked casually, "Oh right, Big Brother Bugneys, you are very familiar with the city. Do you know where the alley near Baker Street leads to?" The drunk cavalry captain on the horse frowned and tilted his head, squinting his eyes. Big Sister Baker? Whose big sister is that? It's the street, not Big Sister Baker. All right, forget it, I was just asking. Bose helplessly turned around. Captain Bose, are you asking about the alley near the crossroads on Baker Street? The cavalry captain wasn't reliable, so the soldier who was supporting him turned around and said casually, "If it's that alley, it leads to the South District and ends at Grancy Street." South District? It's not the East District of the Noble District. Are you sure? Bose paused and suddenly turned around. Of course. The soldier didn't understand and said, "I'm very familiar with that alley. I walk there often. My aunt's house is in that alley," before he could finish his sentence. Damn it. Bose and Bugneys looked at each other, and their expressions changed drastically. Without thinking, they quickly turned around and jumped onto their horses. Let's go, quick, in a dark alley. Tang in, bingo, you're right. What responded to Winston's shrill scream was a slightly mocking chuckle. Too bad there's no reward. Go to hell. At this moment, Winston suddenly understood the whole story of tonight's incident. Philip's appearance in the theater was not a coincidence, and meeting him at the side door was even more not a coincidence. This was a trap set up in advance. Philip came out to humiliate him, then drove him away, and finally made him step into the trap. And Tangen completed the final killing blow. The sense of danger exploded in his body. Like a wild cat whose hair stood on end in an instant, Winston's reaction speed had never been faster than at this moment. He grabbed the long spear beside him, and the green and purple fighting lights flashed violently. Without hesitation, he forcibly twisted his waist and stood up. With his standard back thrust, like a dragon, like a snake, like a beam of light, it instantly pierced through the front wall of the carriage with a roar and shot toward the coachman in front of him. "Let's fight!" Boom! Fine wood chips flew like snowflakes and danced wildly in all directions. Ever since he decided to betray his sect, regardless of day or night, eating or sleeping, Winston had never left his spear. What he was guarding against was this pervasive assassination. In fact, he had indeed done it. During this period of time, there were countless warriors, mages, and even professional assassins who knew that he had betrayed his sect and assassinated his senior brother. The assassinations that came with hatred had never stopped. However, there were very few people who could find a suitable opportunity to kill him in one fell swoop. There were also those who forced their way in, such as the group of bandits who had broken into his family at night 2 days ago. However, the result was that they were all killed by him without exception. After all, he was a Void Realm warrior, and after all, he was from the Sword God's lineage. Whether it was an outsider or Winston, they all had absolute confidence in their own strength and skills. He would not be assassinated so easily. However, the warriors, mages, professional assassins, and so on did not include Tang-un. His historical battle record was enough to explain everything. Winston himself was extremely clear about this point. Therefore, when he threw out that explosive back thrust, Winston also threw out that precious and heavy divine spear at the same time. Then, with a furious roar, he bent his knees and straightened his waist. His body, covered in fighting light, instantly jumped into the air. With a bang, the luxurious carriage was once again heavily damaged, and the exquisite roof instantly shattered into pieces. That's right, he was running away. Although Winston was shouting as if he was going to risk his life, in fact, his real purpose was just to feint to buy himself a chance to catch his breath and escape. That was all. Well, just one exchange, one shot, and he simply ran away. It was indeed a little unexpected, but if one thought about it carefully, it was actually reasonable. Winston was not stupid, and even a fool would not be able to cultivate to the Void Realm. On the contrary, he was very smart with outstanding talent, but he was a little narrow-minded and did not have a big enough vision. He was very clear about the difference in strength between himself and Tang-un. Compared to Tang-un, who dared to intercept the sword god Wu Ding halfway, his strength was indeed nothing. Moreover, this encounter was not in his battle rhythm from the beginning, so he fled very decisively and was very confident. He admitted that his strength was not as good as Tang-un's and that he would definitely die if he fought. However, this was the capital, the foot of the imperial court. As long as he could leave this sealed carriage, as long as he could hold on for a moment, with a long roar, it would be enough to attract the many consecrators and experts of the Divine Palace who were guarding the first prince in the theater to come and surround Tang-un. However, from Tang-un's point of view, there was the setup, the words, the trap, and the assassination rhythm that he could not be more familiar with. After a series of preparatory actions, if he still had to fight 300 rounds with Winston before he could take him down, or if he simply let the other party escape, then he could forget about his title as a top assassin. It would be embarrassing. There's a thorn. Before the deafening warning roar resounded in the sky above the capital, it was directly stuffed back into Winston's mouth. Because, just as his head had just crashed out of the roof of the carriage, a casual blade light, hidden behind the snowflakes in the sky, went straight to his forehead. It was as if his dagger had been hanging above the roof of the carriage, waiting quietly from the beginning to the end, waiting for Winston to run into it like an idiot and stretch out his neck to be killed fast, extremely fast, and not just fast. As he felt the coldness of the blade before his eyes, Winston's pupils shrank rapidly, and a hint of realization suddenly flashed in his eyes. As it turned out, this was not just a trap that had been set up in advance, but a show that followed the prescribed order. He had been schemed against in the play. No, he had been seen through. The other party knew that his shot was just a pretense. He knew that he was going to escape early in the morning, and he knew that he would escape from the roof of the carriage. It was as if he had rehearsed it 1,000 times, and the ending was inevitable. Puff! In a flash, in the middle of his eyebrows, a one-hit kill. A muffled rumble slowly echoed in the quiet alley. The two figures fell back into the carriage again, as if they had broken something like a teacup, a candlestick, and other things. There was a crisp sound. Then there was no more sound or movement. Am I wrong? This was Winston's last question before his consciousness dissipated. His blood-red eyes were wide open, and he muttered to himself, "I don't know." This was Tang Yin's answer. It was very straightforward. He had been very busy these few days. He really did not know or care about Winston's inner turmoil during this period of time. He was only here to kill. That was all. Naturally, he could not give any meaningful answer. Of course, even if he gave it, Winston would not have the chance to hear it. Puff. He pulled back the dagger and raised his hand to cover Winston's eyes at the same time. Then, he sighed from the bottom of his heart. "Rest in peace, kid. You should be satisfied. I wanted to kill you for a long time. I've let you live until now." Chapter 1089. Even though a certain guy called Raccoon had paved the way for Winston for Tang Yin, this was really just an ordinary assassination. And that was the truth. In terms of status, although Tang Yin did not have a small opinion of Winston, and especially hated the other party for repeatedly bringing people to provoke him, endlessly, like a bored fly. But who would have a deep hatred for a fly? Tang Yin felt the same way about Winston. If it wasn't for Wu Ding and Philip's repeated requests, he really wouldn't have thought of doing anything to Winston. In terms of strength, although when Silen's talent was outstanding, his strength was astonishing, and he was a rare void-level martial artist on the continent. But how many void-level warriors had died under Tang Yin's blade? There were early-stage, mid-stage, and even peak-stage void-level warriors. How could Winston, who had relied on his family's various heavenly materials and earthly treasures to take a step into the void level? It didn't matter if there was one more or one less. If he was killed, he was killed. That was all. There was nothing to make a fuss about. "Boss, there's a squad of garrison cavalry coming this way." When Tang Yin pulled down the curtain and wiped the blood off his hands, he pushed open the car door and stepped out, and a figure appeared on the wall like an agile cat. It was Luke, holding a spear in his hand. It was the spear that Winston had thrown out earlier. Tang Yin was stunned when he heard this. He opened his mouth to say something, but suddenly, a shrill whistle broke the silence of the snowy night. It came from the distance. The garrison cavalry's whistle was a whistle that the garrison cavalry took the initiative to blow when the situation was critical or when they discovered traces of a fugitive. It was used to gather their companions and warn unrelated people to quickly retreat and not affect the garrison's investigation of the case. What was worth noting was that this was something that was only blown after the situation was discovered. In other words, the squad of garrison cavalry that was rushing over in the distance had already discovered the abnormal situation here. So fast. No matter how big the gap in strength between Winston and Tang Yin was, as long as it was an assassination, Tang Yin wouldn't be careless. Including the surrounding environment, patrolling guards, and so on, Tang Yin would certainly investigate and prepare in advance. Logically speaking, the garrison cavalry shouldn't have reacted so quickly. Even if they had noticed the commotion, they shouldn't have arrived so quickly. But looking at the current situation, Tang Yin, who didn't know that he had bumped into his old rival again, rubbed his nose in surprise when he heard the news. He sighed inwardly. As expected of the capital of the empire, the speed of the dispatch of police is too fast. Well, although Tang Yin was caught off guard, it was actually not a big deal. Just by hearing the distant whistle, he knew that it would take some time for the other party to arrive, so there was no need to be nervous. "Harry, take some people to clean up the scene and get rid of the carriage. Luke, go personally and inform Philip that the matter has been settled. I'll stay here for the time being. I might need to wrap things up later." The efficiency of the gray space was undeniably professional. A moment later, when Bose and the others finally stepped into the alley, everything had returned to normal. The falling snowflakes even covered the tire tracks. Search, inch by inch, search carefully. Be careful. If you discover anything strange, inform us first and don't make a ruckus. Bose and Selena, who had solved countless cases and sent countless vicious criminals to the gallows, naturally understood that if there was something wrong with the luxurious carriage just now, then the place to make a move would definitely be in this secluded and deep alley. But right now, there was nothing strange about this place. That could only mean that the other party's methods were rather brilliant, and not something a normal garrison dragon rider could deal with swords at their sides and spears in their hands. The group of garrison dragon riders dismounted. Stepping on the rustling snow, they cautiously and meticulously probed into the depths of the alley. The ones at the very front with torches raised high were precisely Bose and Bugnes. Compared to the fearful, excited, or indifferent expressions of the knights, Bose and Selena were much calmer. They looked around, rubbing their noses and sneezing from time to time, as if they didn't care at all. This naturally wasn't because they were careless, but rather because they had seen too many similar scenes before. However, when they reached the middle of the alley, they suddenly stopped. With a schwa sound, they raised their palms, stopping their steps. When the group of cavalry behind them saw this, their hearts immediately tightened. They subconsciously raised their blades and spears, looking forward. Bose narrowed his single eye at the bare walls on both sides, and then lowered his head to look at the snowy ground beneath his feet. Then his entirely red nose sniffed, sniffing again and again like a hunting dog. Captain? Oh, it's nothing." Bose's expression recovered its indifference. Without turning around, he directly gave the order, "Bugnes, the location of the incident doesn't seem to be in this alley. Why don't you bring some people to the other end of the alley, Grancy Street, and see if there are any discoveries there?" "All right." Bugnes' brows jumped, and then he nodded in agreement. He turned around and waved his hand towards the group of knights behind him, saying, "Didn't you hear? Achoo! What are you still standing there for? All of you go to Grancy Street. You have to find that O'Glare family carriage." "Yes, Captain." Hearing that the location of the incident was not here, the group of knights immediately relaxed. They quickly passed by Bose and Bugnes and rushed to the other end of the alley. Bose frowned and looked at Bugnes, looking displeased. "I mean, you bring them with you to Grancy Street. Those rookies who have never seen blood are unreliable. Forget it." Bugnes cautiously held onto his spear, his body slightly leaning forward. His eagle-like eyes quickly scanned the surroundings, and he unhappily replied, "After so many years of friendship, do you think I don't understand you? Are you really treating me like a bunch of rookies?" Bose paused, helplessly shaking his head and sighing. "I gave you a chance to live, but you didn't want it. Bugnes, you're simply looking for death. All right, stop talking nonsense. Are you confident that mole is nearby? What do you think? There's the smell of blood here. It's very fresh. Not long ago, I can't be wrong." But Bose also cautiously pulled out his sword. His feet were neither straight nor straight, neither tight nor loose, like a bow that was ready for a full moon. Logically speaking, since we came so quickly, he should have stayed around to clean up the mess, just in case. But I can't find where he is hiding. Bugnes was not surprised, but the corners of his mouth tightened. He and Bose had been partners for most of their lives, and they already knew each other well. He was very clear that this seemingly boorish partner had a miraculous ability to find the traces of the assassin, which was the mole. It was no exaggeration to say that as long as he wanted, even if the mole was 10 feet away, he could still recognize him in the vast sea of people. But now, he had already inferred with certainty that the mole was nearby, but he could not detect the mole's location. What this meant was self-evident. "Come out, mole, if you still have some guts." Bose, who did not find any clues after observing for a while, finally could not help but take the initiative to provoke the mole with his sword. "Huh!" As soon as he finished speaking, a chuckle suddenly sounded clearly, as if it was right beside their ears. Bose and Bugnes were shocked when they heard the sound. They only took one step with the sword in front and the spear behind. instantly standing with their backs facing each other. They had both an offensive and defensive formation, but as far as their eyes could see, the surroundings were still empty. Bows and Bugnes are indeed worthy of the title of the assassin's nemesis. A faint voice floated from all directions, unpredictable. But if I really come out, I'm afraid you won't have the guts. Pretending to be mysterious, you can try. Bose slowly moved his sword, as if he was disdainful. But his heart kept sinking, knowing that this time they had encountered a tough opponent. If things went wrong, both of them might have to stay here. Okay, look up. The two words, look up, turned from illusion to reality. Bose and Bugnes instantly determined the location and subconsciously looked up at the wall beside them. Vaguely, in the snow, they saw a figure sitting casually on the wall, his legs dangling slightly in the air, looking very comfortable. Before they could see clearly, a sword and a spear with an explosion of fighting light had already pierced through the air. A low roar. Die, are you sure? The black figure on the wall did not seem to see the sword and spear. Instead of dodging, his upper body moved forward, revealing a seemingly ordinary but actually nightmarish face in the snowy night. He squinted his long and narrow eyes, and the corners of his mouth rose. You want to fight with me? F***CK. It's you. In the scream of horror, the sword and the spear almost stopped in the air at the same time, trembling slightly, as if they were carrying a huge mountain and could not pierce any further. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.